Hey everyone, Adam Cole here, and before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to realize they were the one stabbing you in the back? Because today's video is about friendship betrayal, the kind that doesn't just hurt in the moment, but stays with you for years. These aren't random stories. These are the people you called family, the ones who knew your secrets, the ones who promised they'd never hurt you, and then did exactly that. In this video, I'm sharing 5 friendship betrayal stories that took a dark turn. One best friend took someone's deepest trauma and turned it into party gossip until she got exposed at her own birthday celebration. Another was given a place to stay when she had absolutely nothing and repaid that kindness by stealing a boyfriend from under the same roof. One ride or die crossed every boundary, broke into her friend's room, uncovered a secret, and turned an entire school against her. Another betrayal happened at work, where helping a best friend or Reddiculous friend land her dream job ended with stolen credit and an attempt to erase the person who helped her get there. And one promise of friends forever completely fell apart when the truth behind anonymous hate messages finally came out. These stories are messy, they're emotional, and they're uncomfortable because they prove something most people don't want to admit. Sometimes the people who say, "I've got your back," are the ones you need to watch the closest. If you've ever been betrayed by a friend or worried you might be, stay with me. And hey, if you want to skip ahead to a specific story, I've added timestamps below for you. Let's get into it. My best friend used my trauma as gossip, so I exposed her secrets at her own birthday party. I was 24 years old when it finally hit me that the person I had trusted most in the world, my best friend, my supposed soulmate in friendship, my ride or die since high school, had been treating my trauma like her favorite party trick, and it still feels surreal to even say that out loud. Because if you had told 17-year-old me that Lila Hart, the loud, pretty, magnetic girl who walked into my life with her glitter eyeliner and hurricane-level personality, would one day become the reason I stopped trusting people the way I used to, I would have laughed and told you that you were insane, because back then Lila felt like safety, like fun, like everything I thought I didn't deserve, but somehow got anyway. And I clung to her with that desperate kind of loyalty that only insecure teenage girls with messy families understand. We met during junior year at Lincoln High in Seattle when we were assigned to the same table in chemistry class, and she turned to me, flipped her long dark hair, and said, "I hope you're smart, because I suck at this." And something about the way she said it, confident but playful, made me laugh harder than I had in months. And within a week, we were eating lunch together every day, walking home after school, sharing snacks, swapping playlists, and acting like we'd known each other since birth. Because that was the thing about Lila. She didn't just enter your life. She invaded it, wrapped herself around it, made you feel chosen, special, seen. And I was the kind of girl who grew up feeling like an afterthought, with a mom who was physically present but emotionally absent, and a dad who left before I learned my multiplication tables. So having someone like Lila look at me like I mattered felt like a drug I didn't want to quit. I remember the first time I told her something real, something painful, because it wasn't planned. It just slipped out one night when we were 16 and lying on her bedroom floor eating microwave brownies while some trashy dating show played on TV. And she casually asked why I always flinched when someone spoke too loudly. And before I even realized what I was saying, I told her about my ex from sophomore year, the boy who started out sweet and ended up controlling everything from what I wore to who I talked to. How he made me feel small and crazy and terrified, and how the breakup left me with panic attacks that came out of nowhere. I remember expecting her to judge me or pity me, but instead, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and whispered, "I've got you." And in that moment, I honestly thought she meant it, that she would hold those pieces of me like something precious. But God, I was so stupidly naive, because even then, tiny cracks were visible if I hadn't been so eager to ignore them, like the way she loved chaos, how she lit up when telling stories about people's breakups, secrets, drama, how she would embellish things just a little to make them more exciting, and how she had this compulsive need to be the center of attention everywhere we went. But I didn't think much of it, because she was fun and I was lonely, and at 16, you don't understand that attention seeking can become weaponized later. Not until you're older and the damage is already done. Through high school and then college, Lila and I were glued together, almost unnaturally close. The kind of friendship people romanticize on TikTok. Matching bracelets, late night calls, emergency Starbucks runs, borrowing each other's clothes, crying over boys, planning imaginary future apartments, and in all those years, I told her things I had never told anyone else. The fights with my mom that left me shaking, the nights I couldn't sleep because of nightmares about my ex, the way I sometimes felt like I was one emotional shove away from collapsing, and she always reacted the same, stroking my hair, promising she'd protect me, promising she'd never hurt me, promising she'd take every secret to the grave. But somewhere after we turned 21, things started changing in ways that were subtle at first, like when she would joke about how I cried too easily or how I was fragile or sensitive, and people would laugh because they thought she was being playful, but I always felt this slight sting in my chest, like maybe she wasn't joking at all. And then she started making comments in group settings that were a little too close to the truth, like hinting that I had a crazy ex or that Ava has been through some stuff you don't even know. And I brushed it off because it wasn't explicit, and she always followed it up with an arm around my shoulders and a giggle about how she was just teasing. And I wanted to believe her because the alternative, that my best friend was cracking open my pain for attention, was too awful to accept. And every time my intuition whispered that something was off, she would do something sweet or comforting that made me feel guilty for doubting her, like bringing me soup when I was sick or texting me long supportive paragraphs. And that's how Lila operated. This perfect mixture of warmth and poison that kept you confused about which one was real. But looking back now, the signs were everywhere. Like how she constantly flirted with any guy I even remotely liked, brushing her hair and touching their arm and giggling like she didn't notice how it made me feel, and how she always had to one-up any emotional story I told with something bigger, dramatic, exaggerated, and how she somehow always knew everyone's secrets, but never kept them for long, and I should have known she'd eventually treat mine the same way. But I didn't, because I convinced myself she was safe, and people like me cling to the people who feel safe even when they aren't. Things finally snapped into focus on a Friday night in early March when a mutual acquaintance invited me to a small get-together at her apartment in Capitol Hill. And I almost didn't go because I had a long week at work. But Lila insisted she couldn't make it and told me to go without her, saying it would be good for me to socialize without hiding behind her, which I thought was kind of a weird comment, but whatever. So I went. The apartment was crowded but cozy, filled with soft-colored lights and music that was loud enough to vibe with but not loud enough to drown out conversations, and I was pouring myself a plastic cup of sangria when I heard my name in a tone that made my stomach drop. Not the friendly kind of Ava, but the whispery, conspiratorial Ava people use when there's gossip involved, and when I turned, I saw two girls from one of Lila's old college classes sitting on the couch, leaning in close to each other, talking with these animated, shocked expressions, and one of them said, "Yeah, Lila told me everything." Like the panic attacks, the whole abusive ex thing, the way she still freaks out at loud noises. And the other said, "God, that's so sad. I can't believe she went through all that." And I swear time froze because every detail, every word, every nuance in their conversation was mine. My trauma, my vulnerability, my private memories, and they were discussing it like it was an episode recap from a TV show. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding, my hands numb, my vision blurring, the room suddenly feeling too small and too loud. But all I could hear was the echo of my own voice from years of friendship, telling Lila those exact things in the exact tone they were repeating. And in that moment, something in me broke in a way I didn't even feel at first. It was quiet, almost peaceful, like the final click in a lock. The realization that everything I had ignored, minimized, excused, had led to this exact moment, this exact humiliation, this exact betrayal. And it hit me with a coldness that made me feel physically sick. Lila didn't love me. She didn't protect me. She didn't value me. She used me. My pain, my story, my wounds, all of it. For entertainment, for attention, for social currency, and I stood there staring at those girls who didn't even know I was behind them, listening to the exact words I had cried into Lila's arms years ago, being retold as casual gossip. And that was the moment everything changed. The moment the illusion shattered. The moment I realized the truth I had been too scared to see. Lila Hart used my trauma like a party trick, and I had unknowingly handed her the script myself. The night after I overheard those girls talking about my trauma, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I ever had with Lila, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she stopped being my friend and became someone who used my vulnerabilities as currency. But no matter how far back I went, high school, college, last week, it all looked different now, like a movie I was rewatching with brand new context, and every joke, every accidental slip, every "I only said it because I care" felt sinister in hindsight. By morning, anger had replaced a numbness, and I knew I couldn't let another day pass without confronting her, so I texted her, "We need to talk. Today." And she replied within seconds with a bubbly, "OMG, sure babe," brunch, which already irritated me because I wasn't trying to sip mimosas. I was trying to figure out why my best friend turned my trauma into event entertainment. But I agreed because I needed answers. So we met at this cute cafe near Pike Place Market that she loved because it matched her aesthetic. And the moment she walked in, all sunshine and big smiles, calling out, "Ava," like she hadn't shattered my trust, I felt sick. I didn't hug her, didn't smile. I just sat there with my arms crossed, and she immediately noticed, tilting her head and saying, "What's with the mood? Did something happen?" Like she wasn't the something. And I told her in the calmest voice I could manage, "I heard what you told people about me." And just like that, her expression didn't crumble, didn't panic. It shifted so fast it felt rehearsed, like she had a drawer full of reactions and quickly picked the one labeled innocent confusion. And she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "What? What are you talking about? Ava, you're being dramatic." and I swear my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I told her I heard girls talking about my panic attacks, my abusive ex, my triggers, word for word. And she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh my God, babe, that was a misunderstanding. I didn't tell them anything personal. I just mentioned you'd been through some stuff. Everyone has." And the way she said it, casual, dismissive, made my hands shake under the table. And when I pushed back harder, telling her exactly what I heard, she acted offended, clutching her chest, saying, "Are you seriously accusing me after everything I've done for you?" And the way she emphasized everything wasn't lost on me. She started listing her acts of friendship like she was presenting evidence in court. "Who was there when your ex showed up on campus? Me. Who stayed up all night during your panic attack last winter? Me. Who defends you when people say you're too emotional? Me." And the way she weaponized the word defends made something cold settle in my stomach. And when I told her that being there for me didn't give her license to broadcast my trauma, she scoffed and said, "Ava, you're overreacting. I would never betray you. You must have misheard them, or they exaggerated or twisted my words. You know people twist things." And then she reached across the table to touch my hand like she was soothing a child throwing a tantrum. And I pulled away, which made her eyes narrow for a split second before she forced herself to soften again with that fake, serene smile she used whenever she needed to look like the emotionally mature one. And she said, "Baby, you're stressed. I get it, but don't attack me for something I didn't do." And I realized in that moment that Lila would lie even if there was blood on her hands, even if she was caught mid-crime, even if 10 witnesses saw her. He would manipulate reality itself before ever admitting wrongdoing. I left brunch shaking with a mixture of rage and clarity, and that night I cried. Not because of the betrayal, but because of how stupid I felt for trusting her so blindly. For defending her when people warned me she was messy. For telling her things I had never even told my therapist at the time. But eventually, the tears dried and something stronger replaced them. Resolve, suspicion, and a burning need to understand just how deep her betrayal went. Because if she lied this easily about gossiping about my trauma, what else had she lied about? The answer came quicker than I expected. Because once I started paying attention, it became horrifyingly obvious how many people knew pieces of my private life. People I barely knew, greeting me at parties with, "Hey, you're the girl with the panic attacks, right?" Or, "Aren't you the one whose ex was a psycho?" Or, "Lila told me you're really working on yourself. That's so brave." And every time I heard another version of my story repeated by strangers, my heart dropped lower, because it was clear that Lila had been milking my trauma for validation for years, painting herself as the wise caretaker who saved her broken best friend. And the more praise she got, the more details she shared. And once I noticed this pattern, other things started clicking into place. Like how at parties she always had a fresh dramatic story about someone, never herself, always someone else, told in this emotional narrator voice she loved using. And people always leaned in, fascinated, and she fed off that attention like it was oxygen. Then there was the way she would soak up compliments whenever people told her she was such a good friend to me. How she would sigh and say, "Yeah, Ava's been through so much, but I'm always here for her." Like she was some saint for offering the bare minimum of support while simultaneously undermining me behind my back. At my next therapy session, I told my therapist everything. Every detail, every betrayal, every instance of Lila sharing my pain to get sympathy. And my therapist looked at me in that calm, steady way she does and said, "Ava, this isn't friendship. This is emotional exploitation." And hearing those words felt like a punch and a release at the same time, because suddenly it all made sense. Not just the gossip, but the manipulation, the guilt tripping, the subtle insults, the way she made sure everyone saw her as my savior. My therapist told me to observe, not react. So that's exactly what I did. I stepped back, watched, listened, and the more I observed, the more horrifying things I uncovered. Not about myself this time, but about Lila. It started small, with someone casually mentioning that Lila never actually finished college, even though she proudly flaunted her business degree on social media. But this person, someone who had no reason to lie, told me Lila dropped out sophomore year and had been faking her credentials for years, and that was just a warm-up. The next thing I learned was that her boyfriend Tyler had no idea she had been cheating on him with a coworker at her old job for nearly 8 months, because apparently everyone in that circle knew except Tyler himself. And the only reason I found out was because the coworker's ex approached me at a bar and said, "Your friend is trash, you know that, right?" And then proceeded to tell me everything in explicit detail. Then, 2 weeks later, I learned she stole over $1,000 from a charity fundraiser she organized last year. Money people donated for a local shelter, because one of the volunteers drunkenly confessed to me that Lila skimmed a little extra for herself and bragged about being too smart to get caught. And once that door opened, the secrets just kept pouring out. People telling me her stories about stalker exes were fake and designed to make her seem desirable and mysterious, or that she wasn't paying her own rent like she claimed. She had a sugar daddy from Bellevue covering half her bills, something she kept hidden while judging other women for taking shortcuts. It felt like I was assembling a jigsaw puzzle made of lies, and every new piece made the picture uglier, darker, more manipulative, and as much as it horrified me, it also explained why she was so obsessed with controlling the narrative. Because the second her mask slipped, everything would crumble. And that's when it clicked for me. Lila wasn't messy, she wasn't dramatic, she wasn't careless, she was dangerous. The kind of person who built her entire identity on curated performances, who manipulated people like chess pieces, who collected other people's secrets like ammunition while hiding her own behind 10 layers of deception. And suddenly I realized the truth so clearly it almost scared me. Lila hadn't just betrayed me, she had been using me this entire time because my trauma made her look important, loyal, compassionate, and exposing mine helped her keep hers buried. After that realization, I knew I couldn't confront her privately again because she would just lie, gaslight, cry, deflect, or spin the situation until I looked like the villain and worse. She'd know I was onto her, which meant she'd start covering her tracks, so I made a decision that felt both terrifying and empowering. If she wanted an audience so badly, she would get one. If she wanted to turn my pain into performance material, then I would turn her secrets into truth bombs. If she wanted to play with narratives, then I would rewrite the ending. I decided I would expose her, publicly, loudly, undeniably, with receipts, witnesses, and consequences. And I knew exactly when I would do it. At her upcoming 25th birthday party. A huge event she'd been planning for months, bragging about nonstop, describing it as the social event of the year, complete with her boyfriend's family, her coworkers, her old friends, new friends, and anyone she thought would admire her. She wanted a stage, and I was going to give her one, just not the performance she expected. I didn't realize how terrifying revenge feels until the moment I actually decided to go through with it. Planning it wasn't like the movies where everything is fast-paced and dramatic. It was slow, quiet, methodical, the kind of thing that forces you to sit with every emotion you've been avoiding for years. And the more time I spent gathering evidence against Lila, the more I understood that what I was doing wasn't petty or impulsive. It was reclaiming the power I had handed her, piece by piece, since I was 17. And that realization alone was enough to make me cry some nights. Not because I felt guilty, but because I finally understood how deeply she had rooted herself in my identity. How much of myself I had shaped around her approval, her reactions, her moods. The decision to expose her became solid the day I told my friend Hannah what had happened. Hannah, who had always side-eyed Lila, who had always told me that something about her felt off, who had watched for years as I made excuses for behavior she recognized as manipulation, and when I finally broke down and told her everything, she didn't gasp, didn't act shocked, she just said, "Ava, she's been using you. And if you want to stop her, her birthday party is the place." And as soon as she said it, I knew she was right. Lila's 25th birthday was practically her personal Met Gala, a huge event at a downtown venue she'd been bragging about for months. Cocktail dress code, open bar, a live band, fake flower walls for photos, her boyfriend's conservative family attending, her coworkers, her influencer friends, and even a few acquaintances she barely knew, but invited because she wanted the party to look full and aesthetic. And it was precisely that desire for aesthetics, for a perfect public image, that made it the ideal moment to expose her. If she loved attention, then she would get all of it. Raw, unfiltered, catastrophic. Once the plan solidified, I went into full detective mode. And honestly, it was disturbingly easy to gather proof because Lila had never been careful, not once. People she had hurt were eager to tell me what they knew, almost relieved that someone was finally asking, like they had been holding their breath around her for years. One girl from her old sorority sent me screenshots of Lila bragging about her sugar daddy, complaining he only paid half her rent and should honestly be grateful I even hang out with him. And then another person, one of the charity volunteers, emailed me copies of missing funds, records, and text messages where Lila literally said, "Relax, they'll never know," followed by laughing emojis that made my skin crawl. Then came the cheating evidence, which was almost too easy to confirm because the coworker she'd been seeing behind Tyler's back had kept voice memos of their late night calls, and he sent me 2 recordings where she talked about Tyler like he was an inconvenience, saying she only stayed with him because he made her look stable and mature. And I sat there listening to her voice, the same voice she used to comfort me, dripping with arrogance and cruelty, and something inside me hardened. Next, I gathered yet the proof of her fake degree. Photos of her transcript, emails from her advisor confirming she dropped out, DMs from people who remembered her getting kicked out of a required class for plagiarism. I saved everything. Screenshots, voice notes, PDFs, bank statements, chat logs, timestamps, witness accounts, even a short video a guy sent me of Lila trash-talking one of her close friends behind her back, calling her useless and desperate. And I created a digital folder named Truth with subfolders organized by each category of lie. And the more it filled, the more calm I felt, like each piece of evidence untangled a knot in my chest. But the deeper I got into collecting proof, the more I started reflecting on why I had ignored red flags, on why I had allowed someone like her so much access to my life, and on how vulnerable I had been when I met her. I realized that when you grow up craving connection, craving safety, craving one person who feels like home. You lower your guard in ways you shouldn't. You let behavior slide. You brush off discomfort. You mistake intensity for loyalty. And you cling to the fantasy of having your person even when every instinct is telling you to run. And that's exactly what happened with me. I had wanted a sister so badly that I adopted a snake. I reread old messages between us and saw it clearly for the first time. The subtle insults disguised as jokes, the way she always centered herself in my pain, the way she supported me only when it made her look strong, the way she inserted herself into every crisis with phrases like, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," so she could later brag about it to others, the way she praised herself constantly while making me feel like I was a burden she nobly carried. And once that awareness settled, I began emotionally detaching from her like peeling off a tight, constricting skin. I replayed memories and filtered them through truth instead of loyalty, and suddenly our entire friendship looked different. I saw manipulation where I once saw comfort, narcissism where I once saw confidence, cruelty where I once saw humor, and exploitation where I once saw care. I realized she wasn't my family, wasn't my soulmate friend, wasn't the person I cried to at 2 a.m. because she cared. She was the person who took those 2 a.m. confessions and retold them for attention. That understanding made the planning easier, cleaner, almost peaceful. I bought a small flash drive shaped like a gold key, symbolic I guess, and loaded it with every piece of evidence I had collected, labeling each file clearly so there would be no confusion when the time came. Then I wrote everything down in my notes app, not a script, but bullet points, her fake degree, her cheating, the stolen charity money, the sugar daddy, the lies about her past, her manipulative patterns, the things she had said about her friends behind their backs, and then at the bottom of the list, the thing that hurt the most, use my trauma for entertainment. I knew I wouldn't need to read off my phone during the party, but the act of writing it all down made the mission feel real. In the days leading up to the event, I prepared the way someone might prepare for a courtroom trial. I rehearsed what I needed to say. I saved backup copies of every file in case the flash drive malfunctioned. I told 3 witnesses what I planned so they'd be ready to confirm details publicly if needed, and I even wrote a short statement in case I emotionally froze. Though I didn't think I would freeze, I was past fear. I was somewhere deeper, colder, more resolved. Meanwhile, I stayed completely silent toward Lila, replying to her texts with vague friendliness so she wouldn't suspect anything, and she bought it instantly because she always assumed I would stay loyal no matter what she did. I watched her post countdowns on Instagram for her birthday party, brag about her outfit, talk about how loved she felt, thank everyone for supporting her, and every time I saw her face, I felt less and less. By the morning of the event, my hands weren't shaking anymore, my heart wasn't pounding, and my anxiety wasn't suffocating me. I felt calm, grounded, and strangely unbothered, like I had finally stepped outside a house I didn't realize had been burning for years. I got dressed slowly, choosing a simple black dress and tying my hair into a low bun, not because I wanted to stand out, but because I wanted to walk into that room, looking like someone who meant every word she was about to say. I put the flash drive in my clutch, checked that my phone was fully charged, reviewed my mental plan one last time, and stared at myself in the mirror. Really stared. And for the first time in years, I didn't see Lila's shadow hanging over me. I saw myself, Ava, 24 years old, tired but strong, afraid but brave enough to walk into the fire she didn't start but was finally willing to finish. And then, with a deep breath that felt like the closing of one life and the opening of another, I grabbed my keys, stepped outside into the cold Seattle night, drove toward the glowing downtown skyline, and walked into Lila Hart's birthday party with the truth in my purse, evidence in my hand, and the full intention of burning her entire facade to the ground. I walked into Lila's 25th birthday party with a calmness I didn't recognize in myself. The kind that comes right before a storm you've stopped running from. The kind that settles in your bones when you know you're finally done being the quiet one who swallows pain and keeps secrets that were never respected in the first place. And the moment I stepped inside her rented event space, a high-ceilinged rooftop lounge in downtown Austin, decorated with twinkling string lights, gold balloons shaped like E25, and a giant backdrop that said Lila's Legacy. Because of course she would call her birthday party something dramatic and self-branding, I could feel every emotion I had been carrying for 10 years tighten in my chest. Not with fear, but with the certainty that tonight, finally, the truth would breathe. And maybe for the first time, I would too. People were dressed in semi-formal outfits, sipping champagne, laughing, doing that thing they always did around Lila, where they acted like she was some sort of magnetic sun everyone orbited. And she thrived in the center of it all. Her tight sequined dress hugging every curve, her hair in those soft Hollywood waves she always paid $180 for, her makeup thick and perfect like she was posing for a magazine cover, instead of celebrating her birthday with mostly acquaintances she barely liked, but desperately wanted validation from. And I watched her hold court, giving exaggerated hugs, fake laughing so loudly her voice pierced through the music, hyping up stories about manifesting greatness, all while I stood near the bar wearing a black satin slip dress and a neutral expression because I promised myself I would not cry, not shake, not falter, no matter what happened next. And the funniest part is that despite everything she had done, despite the months of betrayal and manipulation and emotional cannibalism, she still tried to greet me with that sugary smile, like she hadn't ripped open my trauma and handed it to strangers like party favors. "Ava, you made it!" She squealed, arms outstretched, acting like we were still best friends, acting like she hadn't gaslit me, mocked me, exposed me, undermined me, and harvested my pain for entertainment, and I gave her the most polite hug known to mankind, the kind where only shoulders touch and no warmth is exchanged, and she didn't notice because she was too busy being adored by everyone else, too busy making sure people saw her as the radiant, generous birthday girl whose friendships were so deep and sacred that she could call people her sisters. And yet the truth was simmering on my phone like a loaded weapon. Her boyfriend, Ethan, walked over next, looking exhausted in that way men look when they've spent too long loving someone who drains them quietly, and he gave me a small nod, one that said he trusted me even before knowing why he should, which made what I was about to do even heavier but also even more necessary, because he deserved to know who he was standing next to, who he was calling his partner, who he was planning to move in with, and I wasn't going to let him build the rest of his life on lies curated by a woman who couldn't stop performing long enough to be honest with the people who cared about her. More guests arrived, co-workers, her cousins, her boyfriend's family, and a bunch of random social climber friends she had accumulated through Instagram. All of them drinking, smiling, unaware that the room they were in was basically a minefield waiting to detonate. And the whole time, I stood there rehearsing the truth in my mind. Not the dramatic version, not the vengeful version, but the factual version, the screenshots in my notes app, the bank receipts showing the missing charity money, the voice notes she accidentally left recording where she called me emotionally fragile but great for sympathy. The text she sent calling her other friends pathetic, desperate, boring placeholders. The messages to her sugar daddy thanking him for covering rent 2 months in a row while telling Ethan she was working extra shifts, and even the email confirmation proving her so-called business degree was just a certificate from an online scam course she never completed. All of it was sitting in my phone like a beating heart ready for surgery. And my own heart was steady. Surprisingly so, because somewhere between the betrayal and the planning, I had shifted from hurting to healing, and healing sometimes requires burning down the building where you were wounded. The music lowered when her cousin tapped a mic and announced, "Everyone, gather around. Lila wants to say a few words," and of course she did, because Lila couldn't survive without an audience. And everyone circled around the center of the room as she strutted up with her champagne glass, smiling so wide I swear I saw the ambition in her molars. And I knew instantly this speech would be dramatic, self-congratulatory, and dripping with fake tenderness, because that was her brand: vulnerability as performance, closeness as currency, friendship as aesthetic, and when she cleared her throat, silence fell, the kind that makes your stomach twist when you know something big is coming. And she began, "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, especially the people who've been with me through everything." And her voice wobbled in that rehearsed, emotional way she always used whenever she wanted sympathy or admiration. And people immediately awed and smiled, and I rolled my eyes because I could already hear the direction this was heading. The past few years, she continued dramatically, placing her hand on her chest, have been full of change and challenges, and I've grown so much. And I want to acknowledge the people who helped me become the strong woman I am today. And she looked around the room theatrically, scanning faces like a spotlight searching for meaning, before her gaze landed on me intentionally, because she loved using me as a prop, loved performing our deep friendship for applause, loved acting like she was my savior instead of my saboteur, and then she said it, the line that lit the match inside me. Some friendships are more than friendships, they're sisterhoods. And Ava, you've always been my sister. The room cooed, people clapped, someone actually wiped a tear, and I stood there, feeling nothing but a cold, clean clarity that I had been waiting years to taste, because hearing her say sister was like hearing a thief call herself an honest woman. She continued rambling about loyalty and gratitude and how proud she was of her growth, and I swear the irony nearly cracked the floor beneath us. But as soon as she finished her Oscar-worthy monologue, she lifted her glass for a toast, and that was my moment. Before anyone else could cheer, before the DJ could turn the music back up, before Lila could bask in more applause she didn't deserve, I stepped forward with a calmness so foreign that even Lila's smile flickered, and I said, "I'd like to say something too." And the room shifted, the kind of subtle repositioning people do when they sense drama before understanding why. And Lila tried to play it cool, smiling wide like she was thrilled to share the spotlight. But the slight twitch in her jaw told me she sensed something was off. I took the mic gently from her cousin, lifted my glass just slightly, and looked around at the faces in the room. Some familiar, some strangers, some people who had heard lies about me, some who had heard lies about each other, and with the softest voice I had ever used in public, I said, "I want to talk about friendship," and Lila visibly relaxed, probably assuming I was about to give her the validation she craved. And for a second, I let the silence marinate, let the tension settle, let the truth gather its strength before I set it free. Then I continued. Real friendship is built on trust, respect, privacy, loyalty. And tonight, I think it's important everyone here knows what those words actually look like when they're broken. A murmur rippled through the room. Lila's smile faltered. Her boyfriend's eyebrows furrowed, and I kept going, steady and painfully calm. For years, I said, I believed Lila was my ride or die. I believed she supported me, protected me, cared about me, and I shared things with her, painful things, vulnerable things, because I thought she valued me. But recently, I learned something. I unlocked my phone slowly, deliberately, watching the panic bloom in Lila's eyes, and said, my trauma wasn't sacred to her. It was entertainment. Gasps scattered across the room like falling glass. Lila immediately blurted, Ava, what are you talking about? But her voice shook, and I didn't even look at her. Instead, I tapped on the first audio file, the voice note where she mocked my panic attacks and said I was low maintenance drama, easy sympathy, a good emotional accessory. And the room went silent as her own voice filled the speakers, casual and cruel and unmistakably hers. And I watched her boyfriend's entire face collapse, watched her mother gasp and cover her mouth, watched her friends stare at her like they were seeing her for the first time. And before she could spin it, before she could lie, I opened my notes app and projected screenshots onto the connected screen behind me. Every text with her insults about her closest friends, calling one a desperate wannabe, another a clout-chasing loser, another too boring to hang out with unless I need filler people. And I watched every one of those friends step back from her as if she carried a disease. She started crying then, those dramatic, exhausting tears she used whenever she got caught. And she sobbed, these are out of context, this is twisted. But I kept speaking, my voice calm enough to terrify her. Okay, let's add context. And I pulled up the bank statement showing the missing $1,000 from the charity fundraiser she organized, the one she blamed a volunteer for, and then the screenshots of her messages to her sugar daddy, thanking him for covering her rent, followed by the text she sent to her boyfriend, claiming she was broke and stressed, and the room filled with whispers, disbelief, disgust, and Ethan, sweet, kind, loyal Ethan, just stared at her like he didn't know the woman in front of him, because he didn't. Then came the cheating, the screenshots from the guy she was hooking up with behind Ethan's back, the timestamps proving she met him on nights she told Ethan she was out with her girls, the pictures she sent that matched outfits she wore to family dinners. And Ethan walked away without a word, straight out the door, head shaking, hands trembling, and Lila screamed after him. But no one followed her because no one believed her anymore. And when she tried to grab my arm, I stepped back and said, "Don't touch me," in a tone so sharp she froze. Still, she tried to salvage herself, sobbing that I was jealous, ungrateful, dramatic, insane, all the predictable things narcissists say when cornered, but the evidence was too much, too layered, too interconnected. And finally, I ended it all with one last line. "Lila, I didn't expose you. You exposed yourself." I just held up the mirror. And with that, I placed the mic down gently, picked up my bag, and walked out through the stunned silence. The kind of silence that follows a building implosion, and for the first time in a decade, maybe in my entire life, I felt free. Like someone had cut the strings she tied around my ribs, like I could breathe without asking permission. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I didn't look back. Not once. Because some chapters aren't meant to be reread, and some endings feel less like destruction and more like rebirth. And by the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with messages. Some from people congratulating me for my strength, some apologizing for believing her over me, some confessing they had their own stories of her cruelty but were too scared to speak. And I realized then that exposing her wasn't just revenge, it was release for all of us. And as I sat behind the wheel, watching the city lights stretch across the skyline, I whispered to myself, "It's over." And for the first time, I believed it. I took her in when she had no one. Then she stole my boyfriend while living under my roof. I've always thought of myself as the kind of person who cares too much, maybe even to a fault, but I never minded it. I liked stability. I liked knowing where I stood with people, and I liked my life in Portland, my small but cozy apartment on the east side. The mornings when I brewed my coffee while Liam snored softly next to me. The quiet routine that made me feel safe, like I could breathe without worrying about anyone else's chaos. And for 3 years, my life had felt exactly like that. Perfect in a mundane, grounding sort of way, until Emily called and everything I thought I knew about boundaries, friendship, and trust started to unravel at the edges, because Emily was my childhood friend, the one I had grown up with, who had scraped her knees and cried in my backyard, who had shared secrets I swore I'd never tell. And now, years later, hearing her voice trembling over the phone at 11:37 p.m., the sound of tears pooling in her words and a shaky inhale that made my chest tighten, I didn't hesitate. She told me, in a fragmented, sobbing way, that her boyfriend had kicked her out, that she had nowhere to go, that she was scared, that the world felt like it was closing in on her again. And in that moment, my mind didn't pause to ask if I should say yes, if I should consider the consequences. It just agreed. Yes, come here, come now. You can stay as long as you need. And before I could even second guess myself, I was grabbing my coat, keys in hand, and driving through the rainy streets of Portland, trying to focus on the headlights ahead, while my heart hammered in anticipation and guilt because I had no idea if I was doing the right thing, but I knew I couldn't leave her out there. She had always been fragile, always the kind of person who let the world stomp on her until she had no fight left. And I couldn't let that happen again. Not if I could stop it. Not if I could be the person she thought I still was, the person who could save her from herself and the mess she always seemed to stumble into. So I found her huddled on a grimy bench near her old apartment, shaking, soaked through, mascara running down her face, and the instant I opened the car door, she practically threw herself into me. Her arms wrapping around my neck, her face pressed into my shoulder as though if she could merge with me, she could dissolve all the fear and pain she carried. And I let her, because at that moment, letting her cry on me felt like the most human thing I could do. And when we got back to my apartment, the familiar smell of cinnamon candles and old books, the soft hum of the heater. She hesitated at the threshold, glancing around as if the space itself was foreign, and then she slowly, almost timidly, stepped in, shedding her wet coat and boots like she was trying to leave the storm behind. And I watched her, fascinated and worried, as she curled onto my couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, whispering that she couldn't believe I had let her in, and I told her it was fine. It was normal, it was what friends did, and for hours she just sat there talking in fragments about her boyfriend, about how he had shouted, how he had thrown things, how the apartment that was supposed to feel like home had felt like a cage, and as she spoke I felt a mix of relief and unease, because Emily had always been dramatic, always the one to pull at your heartstrings, and yet this felt different, rawer, more real, more urgent, and I couldn't help but let her stay with me for longer, because what else could I do? What else should I do when someone you love, someone who had shared your childhood and your secrets, needed you? And I watched her slowly unwind on my couch, her eyes darting around as she noticed the little things in my apartment. My framed art prints, the plants Liam had insisted on buying even though I hated ferns, the stack of books by the window, and I noticed something else too. A subtle mirroring of me in the way she smoothed her hands over the blanket, the way she tilted her head when listening, the way she laughed softly when Liam came in to say hello, a little too long, a little too warm, a little like she was trying to belong in a way that wasn't just gratitude. And I brushed it off, told myself she was fragile, she was just grateful, she was tired and scared and confused, not manipulative, not scheming, not the Emily from my nightmares. And yet, even as I told myself that, I felt a twinge in my chest when I saw her glance at Liam with something in her eyes that I couldn't name, a flicker that made my stomach twist in a way that was unfamiliar and unwelcome. And I shoved the thought aside because I wanted to be a good friend, because I wanted to be the person who didn't abandon people, who didn't let them fend for themselves when the world had already beaten them down. And I reminded myself that Liam had been calm, kind, and understanding, that he had smiled politely, that he had sat with her and offered a blanket, that he had poured her a cup of tea and nothing had happened, nothing inappropriate, nothing intentional, just kindness. And I wanted to believe that. I wanted to trust both of them because I had always believed in people, even when it hurt me, even when it ended up backfiring. And over the next few days, I let Emily settle in, let her pick a spot on the couch that felt like hers, let her raid my kitchen for snacks, let her borrow a towel and leave it wet on the bathroom floor without comment, let her sit on the edge of my bed, talking quietly while I worked from home. And all the while, I noticed small patterns, little things that made me pause but that I justified. She laughed a little too easily at Liam's jokes. She found excuses to brush past me in the hallway. She mimicked the way I held my coffee cup, the way I ran my hand through my hair, and each time I told myself it was empathy. It was rapport, it was comfort, not a warning, not a manipulation, and yet I couldn't ignore the tiny pangs of unease that hit me when she lingered near him while I made dinner, when she flopped onto the couch next to him and leaned into his shoulder just slightly too long, when she asked me about our relationship, about what we did on weekends, about what made us happy, and I answered because I didn't want to seem cold or suspicious, because I wanted her to feel safe, because I had promised myself I would protect her, even if it meant bending over backwards. And I found myself remembering all the nights we had spent together as kids, the sleepovers, the whispered secrets, the fights we had survived, the promises we had made to always have each other's backs. And I told myself this was that same loyalty, that same bond, that same protective instinct, and that if I saw warning signs, it was because I was imagining them, because I didn't want to betray her, because I didn't want to admit that someone I had loved so deeply could be dangerous. And as the week wore on, Emily became more comfortable, more confident, more intertwined with our lives, asking Liam questions about work, commenting on the books I had read, suggesting we watch shows she knew I loved, and I let it happen because it felt like home, because it felt like being needed, and I liked that, I wanted that, I craved that connection, even if part of me whispered warnings. And one night, as we all sat together on the couch, Liam leaning back with his arm across the back, Emily perched on the cushion next to him, her leg brushing against his, laughing at something silly I said, I felt it. The small, sharp twist of jealousy and confusion, the tug at my chest that I hated to feel but couldn't deny. And I told myself to calm down, that she was just lonely, that she was scared, that she was recovering, that I had done the right thing by letting her in, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting, that the balance of my carefully curated life was being tipped, that the lines between friendship and intrusion were blurring, that maybe, just maybe, in trying to save her, I had unknowingly invited a storm I wasn't ready to weather. And as I watched Emily's head tilt toward Liam, her hand brushing his arm with a casual familiarity that made me tighten my jaw, I realized that being kind didn't always guarantee safety, that loyalty could sometimes come at a cost, and that my life, my love, and my trust were suddenly all up for negotiation in ways I couldn't have anticipated, and I didn't know it yet. But the first chapter of what would become the most devastating betrayal of my life had begun the moment I opened my door to her. And in the quiet hum of my apartment, in the soft flicker of the hallway light, I felt both the warmth of doing the right thing and the icy prelude of the storm that was already circling just outside the fragile bubble of my perfect little world. I thought I was being careful, that I was paying attention, that I was balancing compassion with common sense, but the truth is, Emily had a way of slipping under my radar, of weaving herself into the edges of my life so seamlessly that by the time I realized what she was doing, the threads had already started pulling apart the fabric of my carefully organized world. And it started with the little things, the tiny infringements that I brushed off because I didn't want to be the person who judged a friend in crisis. Like the morning I found her wearing my favorite sweater without asking, the one Liam had commented on 100 times. And when I asked her casually if she had borrowed it, she laughed softly, that shy, fragile laugh she always used, and said, "I just wanted to feel cozy." As if that explained everything, and I nodded, told myself it didn't matter, it was just a sweater, and then the next day it was my coffee mug, gone from the kitchen counter, only to be found sitting in the sink with her lipstick smudged across the rim, and again I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking, but little by little the tiny trespasses added up. And then there was Liam, who didn't see it, or maybe chose not to, because Emily had this effortless way of inserting herself into every interaction, sliding into conversations we were having, leaning just a little too close, laughing a little too easily, making little comments that seemed innocent until you replayed them in your head later, the way she would casually touch his arm while I poured coffee, the way she whispered things when I stepped into the kitchen, little words meant to sting or confuse, little seeds of doubt that she planted without ever raising her voice, without ever making a scene, and I felt my stomach twist each time, felt that flicker of unease that I had been telling myself for a week wasn't real, that I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, that I should just let her be, because she was fragile, because she was grateful, because I had to protect her, and yet the guilt of feeling jealous, the shame of noticing how she stared at him while pretending to look at the TV, the way she laughed at his jokes like she understood him better than I did, the nickname she started calling him when she thought I wasn't listening, Liam Bear, a stupid saccharine thing that made my chest tighten every time I heard it because it was hers, a little claim she was making on him in a way that felt invisible but painfully real. And I gaslighted myself relentlessly, telling myself I was imagining it, that he would never, could never respond to her that way, that our relationship was solid, that my trust was enough, and yet the cracks were forming, invisible at first, then slowly widening, and I noticed the breakfast she started making for him when I had early shifts. Small gestures that felt like love disguised as kindness, the way he thanked her, the way she beamed when he smiled, and I wanted to be the bigger person, the understanding friend, so I didn't say anything, so I didn't stop her. Even though my gut twisted and my stomach nodded, even though part of me screamed that this wasn't normal, that boundaries were being crossed, that my home, my relationship, my life were slowly being infiltrated by someone who didn't just want help, but wanted to take. And yet I kept quiet because calling it out felt cruel, because she was hurting, because I had told myself I was always the one who had to save people. And the day she started whispering little things in his ear when I was in the other room, little questions about my moods, little hints about my jealousy when he canceled plans with me, small provocations designed to make me doubt myself, I realized that maybe I wasn't imagining it. Maybe she was actively nudging a wedge between us, and it broke something inside me to admit it, to even think it, because Emily had been my friend since childhood, my confidant, the person I had promised to always have my back, the person I had taken in when she had nowhere else to go, and the betrayal of even imagining that she could manipulate my life, my home, my love was unbearable. But the evidence was everywhere if I looked, if I let myself see it. From the way she leaned into Liam when I walked in, the way she laughed at things I hadn't said, the way she mirrored me subtly in everything from the tilt of her head to the way she ran her hands through her hair when she was nervous, as if she wanted to be me, as if she wanted to replace me, and yet I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that it was just coincidence, that she was lonely, that she needed love, that I was being unkind by feeling jealous, and every time she made a little comment meant to provoke an argument, like asking Liam if he ever got annoyed when I bossed him around, or if he preferred someone more fun, or whispering things about how I was so serious all the time. I felt the tug of doubt, The creeping guilt that maybe I was overbearing, maybe I was too rigid, maybe I was imagining the tension, maybe the cracks were all in my head, and I started to notice how hard it was to trust my own instincts, how much energy I spent questioning myself instead of observing her. And the more I questioned myself, the more she smiled, the more she leaned in, the more she became the person Liam laughed with in a way that felt new. Exciting, magnetic, the person whose shoulder he rested against while I was in the kitchen, the person whose opinions he sought more than mine, and I hated myself for noticing it, for feeling the swell of jealousy, for thinking that maybe the home I had opened to help someone in need was being transformed into something unrecognizable, and I spent nights lying awake in bed, watching Liam sleep, listening to the soft breathing I had loved for years, imagining what it would feel like to have her pressed up next to him, imagining how he might respond to her touch, imagining the betrayal before it even happened, and hating myself for letting it creep into my mind. And yet I couldn't stop seeing the signs, couldn't stop noticing how she had become a fixture in our lives, how she cooked, cleaned, joked, lingered, laughed, leaned, whispered, and inserted herself with this terrifying subtlety into everything. How she asked Liam questions about things I hadn't told her, little things that made me pause, little things that seemed impossible for her to know unless she had been listening, observing, absorbing, and I told myself again and again that I had to be patient, that she was just lonely, that she was scared, that she was broken, that I was being cruel if I judged her. But the cracks in my mind were widening, and I realized that no matter how much I wanted to ignore them, no matter how much I wanted to preserve the comfort of my life, the truth was unavoidable. Something about Emily was wrong. Something about her presence was corrosive, and for the first time, I felt fear. Not of her, not exactly, but of the damage she could do. The way she could take what I had, what I loved, and twist it into something unrecognizable. And I sat there one evening, my coffee growing cold in my hands, while Emily laughed at something Liam said, leaning closer than any friend should, and I realized with a sinking, icy certainty that the cracks weren't just in my relationship, they were in my perception, in my home, in the life I thought was stable, and that for all my years of loyalty, for all my kindness, for all my attempts to help someone I loved, I might have just invited a storm into my life, one I had no idea how to stop. And I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I thought I had prepared myself for anything, that I could handle the tension, the subtle manipulations, the little betrayals that had been creeping into my life for weeks, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have readied me for the moment I walked into my apartment that day. The rain still dripping off my coat, and my hands clutching my cancelled meeting folder, the streets of Portland gray and quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. And I noticed immediately that something was off, because the usual sounds of the apartment, the hum of the heater, Liam's soft humming in the kitchen, Emily's voice chatting quietly somewhere in the living room, were gone, replaced by a heavy, almost suffocating stillness. And the second I stepped into the hallway, the scent hit me before anything else. Emily's perfume, sharp, overwhelming, invasive, clinging to the air like a warning I hadn't understood. And my chest tightened instinctively, my mind racing as I called out Liam's name softly, then a little louder, feeling the pit of anxiety twist in my stomach. And when no answer came, I walked toward the bedroom. Each step heavier than the last, a premonition crawling up my spine, the air growing thicker, the hallway darker somehow, despite the sunlight sneaking in through the blinds, and I reached the door and froze for just a fraction of a second before pushing it open. And there they were, Liam, my love, the man I had trusted with my life, and Emily, pressed together in my own bed, her arm draped possessively across him, his hand tangled in her hair, their faces inches apart, her lips brushing his in a way that made my knees buckle and my vision blur. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even scream, because the world itself seemed to shatter into pieces around me. My apartment suddenly alien, my home violated, the soft hum of the heater drowned by the ringing in my ears, my heart pounding like a drum I couldn't escape. And Emily looked up at me, startled at first, then defiant, like she had been caught but didn't care. And Liam froze mid-motion, guilt written across his face, but also a hint of stubbornness, a feeble attempt at justification. And I felt my hands clench into fists, my nails biting into my palms, my mind spinning with disbelief, anger, heartbreak, humiliation, all at once. Because how could this happen in the one place I had thought was safe? How could the person I had trusted most betray me in the most intimate, personal way imaginable? And Emily tried to speak first, her voice sickly sweet, dripping with excuses that made my stomach turn. Ava, it's not what it looks like. And I cut her off because I couldn't even bear the sound of her lying, couldn't process how calm she was while I was crumbling. And Liam tried to explain, stammering, fumbling with words, guilt spilling from him, but also defensiveness, trying to justify what he had done, trying to make it seem like some twisted version of a mistake, a lapse in judgment, something that could be forgiven. But I couldn't hear him, couldn't see him as my partner anymore, couldn't even acknowledge the man I had loved for 3 years. And I remember shouting, screaming, every word a sharp knife cutting through the tension and the silence that had been suffocating me, telling them to get out. both of them, right now. And I watched them stumble through the apartment. Emily with that smug little smirk she always wore when she thought she was clever, Liam looking ashamed but still weak. And when the door slammed behind them, I collapsed onto the bed, the sheets still carrying the scent of betrayal, my body shaking uncontrollably, my mind unable to process how everything I'd believed in, the love, the loyalty, the home I had built, was gone in a matter of seconds, and I cried like I hadn't in years. Loud, ragged, full of heartbreak and fury, letting all the tension and fear and grief pour out of me. And in the days that followed, I barely slept, barely ate, barely looked at the world outside, because I had to make sense of it, had to understand how someone I had loved could hurt me in this way, how someone I had taken in to protect could become my worst nightmare. And slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild myself, leaning on coworkers who didn't judge me, neighbors who checked in with a plate of food or a quiet smile, my sister who refused to let me drown in self-blame. And little by little, the edges of my world started to sharpen again, the colors returning to my apartment, the hum of life filling the spaces Emily had tried to occupy with manipulation and charm. And as I dug deeper, as I sifted through memories and texts and the small inconsistencies I had ignored, I discovered a pattern. A history of Emily using people, of sabotaging relationships, of manipulating men to secure places to live, of weaving her way into lives and then breaking them when they had outlived their usefulness. And the realization hit me like a punch to the chest that the betrayal wasn't about me, wasn't about my worth, wasn't about anything I'd done. It was her pattern, her compulsive way of taking what she wanted from people who were kind enough to give it. And understanding that brought a strange, cold clarity, a sense of control that I hadn't had in the chaos, because finally I could see the truth without twisting it, without bending it to fit some comforting narrative, and I started to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner, for feeling jealous, for feeling weak, because I had been human, and human beings make mistakes, and even as I continued to heal, even as I rebuilt the walls of my apartment and my life, I knew I would never forget the sting, the shock, the absolute collapse of trust that had rocked me to my core. And I promised myself that no matter what happened next, I would never let someone like Emily take that power from me again. Never let someone manipulate my love, my trust, my home. And in the quiet moments, when the apartment was empty and the sunlight fell across the bed that had once been violated, I could finally breathe, just a little, because I had survived the worst. I had seen the truth, and for the first time since that day, I felt like I might be strong enough to face whatever came next without crumbling. After the storm, after the betrayal that had shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and safety, I realized that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. And it was terrifying at first. The way silence settled over my apartment like a heavy curtain, the way every corner seemed to echo with memories of what had been lost. But slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. Not just the walls and furniture and routines, but myself, the core of who I was and who I wanted to be. And it started with therapy, with sitting in a quiet office and letting someone help me untangle the years of guilt I had carried. The belief that taking care of everyone else was my purpose, that I had to absorb their pain to be worthy, that I had failed because Emily had betrayed me, because Liam had chosen her for a moment, and each session peeled away a layer of self-blame I didn't know I had been hiding under, and I confronted every memory where I had overextended myself, every instant where I had ignored red flags for the sake of kindness, every moment I had told myself that loyalty meant sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. And I understood that being a caretaker was not a crime, but letting myself be drained, letting others manipulate my love, that was where I had gone wrong. And as I unpacked that truth, as I dug through the wreckage of my past and my friendship with Emily, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized was pressing down on me. A freedom I hadn't allowed myself to feel because I had been so busy surviving the betrayal, so busy hiding the cracks in my heart, so busy replaying the moment I had walked in and seen them together, that I hadn't noticed that I could rise again, that I could reclaim my life, my confidence, my peace. And with that clarity came action. Small steps at first, removing her texts, blocking her on social media, deleting old photos, refusing calls, refusing explanations, refusing apologies, and every time her name surfaced in my mind, I reminded myself that she was irrelevant, that her attempts to worm back into my life were meaningless because I was no longer a passive participant in other people's chaos. And Liam tried too, sending messages dripping with guilt, calling late at night, apologizing profusely, trying to justify, trying to place blame on her or on circumstances, trying to reclaim the intimacy he had destroyed. But I refused. Not with rage, but with deliberate silence, the kind of silence that leaves people exposed to their own conscience. And I watched from a distance as their carefully constructed world collapsed under the weight of their own lies and deceit. Emily growing more desperate, clawing back, messaging me with false vulnerability, claiming she had changed, claiming she regretted everything, and Liam attempting to mediate, attempting to smooth the path for her return. And every time I resisted the urge to respond, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a power in not giving them the drama they craved, the closure in knowing that my absence was the consequence they had earned. And at the same time, I poured myself into my own life, reconnecting with coworkers who offered support without judgment, neighbors who checked in with coffee or encouragement, my sister who reminded me that love didn't have to hurt this much, that trust could be rebuilt carefully, deliberately, that I was not weak for what had happened, but stronger for surviving it. And I started sharing my story, anonymously at first, on support forums, pouring out the pain, the betrayal, the manipulation, the heartbreak, and the lessons learned. And the responses were overwhelming. Strangers validating my feelings, sharing their own experiences, offering advice, giving me a sense of community I hadn't known I needed. And through that connection, I began to see myself not as a victim, but as a survivor. Someone who had navigated a storm that would have destroyed many. Someone who had recognized the signs too late, but had not let them define me. And I rebuilt routines that centered on me. Yoga in the mornings, painting in the afternoons, writing at night, letting myself feel without guilt, learning to say no without explanation, learning to set boundaries that were not negotiable, learning to love myself without the need for external validation. And the transformation was gradual but unmistakable. The cracks of my old self healing into something stronger, sharper, more resilient. Someone who could love without being consumed. Someone who could trust without being naive. Someone who could live without fear of betrayal, defining the rhythm of her life. And one evening, sitting in my sunlit apartment, with the windows open, the city sounds drifting in softly, I realized I was smiling without remembering why, laughing quietly at a thought that had nothing to do with anyone but me. And I understood that this was the real victory. I hadn't waited for karma. I hadn't waited for Emily or Liam to fall apart. I hadn't lingered hoping for apologies or remorse. I had become my own closure, and that empowerment, that clarity, that unshakable confidence in my own life was something they could never take from me, no matter how many rules they had broken, no matter how much damage they had tried to do. And as I finally felt at peace with my past, I knew that I was moving forward fully, completely, unafraid of love, but aware of its boundaries. Unburdened by guilt, but guided by compassion, and in that quiet triumph, I recognized that I had not only survived betrayal, but had transcended it, becoming the woman I was always meant to be, whole, self-sufficient, powerful, and free. And I finally smiled at my own reflection in the mirror, a smile that belonged solely to me, a silent acknowledgement of everything I had endured and overcome. And in that moment, I knew without doubt that I would never let anyone steal my light again. The end. My ride or die friend broke into my room. What she found made her turn the whole school against me. I never thought the day would start like any other, the kind where you feel completely in control of your life, only to have it quietly crumble around you before you even notice. And yet, that's exactly what happened the moment I walked into my bedroom that afternoon, backpack slung over my shoulder, earbuds still tangled in my hair, thinking about nothing more complicated than my algebra quiz and the text Madison had sent me during lunch about meeting up at our usual spot by the basketball courts after school. For those who don't know me, I'm Skylar, 17, junior year of high school in a suburban town in the US, and I've always been the kind of person who keeps her life in neat little compartments: school, friends, home, my own private thoughts. And then there's Madison, my best friend since middle school, my so-called ride or die, the one person I could share absolutely everything with, from my dumbest jokes to my darkest secrets, the kind of friend people write about in sappy teenage movies or gush over in Instagram captions. Except for us, it was real, messy, chaotic in a way that somehow worked because we understood each other completely, or at least I thought we did. Which is why the moment I stepped into my room and noticed the faint scent of lavender that wasn't mine, the slight misalignment of the books on my shelf, and most importantly, the subtle shift of my diary on the nightstand, slightly askew, like someone had thumbed through it in a hurry. I felt this sharp spike of unease that I couldn't quite place at first because, honestly, Madison was the last person I ever thought would betray my trust. Yet the thought lingered like a warning siren in the back of my mind. And as I set my backpack down and peeled off my hoodie, I kept replaying our morning texts in my head, trying to find the hint that I had missed, the clue that something was off, but everything had seemed normal. Her usual emojis, the laugh she sent me after my terrible attempt at a pun, the casual "can't wait to hang later" that now felt loaded with some hidden meaning I couldn't decipher. And I remember flopping onto my bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I was being watched, that someone had crossed a line I had never thought could exist in our friendship. And then it hit me. The drawer I always keep locked, the one with extra notebooks, old letters, and things no one else should ever see, was slightly ajar. Just enough to make my heart start pounding in my chest like a warning drum. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that Madison had been in my room while I was at school, that the person I trusted more than anyone in the world had crossed the unspoken line of friendship and invaded my privacy. And the realization sent this cold, twisting panic through me that made my stomach drop and my hands clammy as I approached the drawer, hesitating, trying to convince myself that maybe I was imagining it. Maybe someone else had come in. Maybe it wasn't her. But deep down, I knew it was her. I could feel the betrayal in the air, like static that clung to my skin, and every memory of our friendship flashed before me. From giggling over dumb YouTube videos to sharing secrets under the bleachers after football practice, to consoling each other after family fights, and it all felt like it was crumbling in real time, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never felt before, and my mind raced through all the possible things she could have found. All the little parts of my life I had kept hidden even from her, like my diary entries detailing crushes she didn't know about, the confessions I wrote late at night about feeling isolated even with friends around, the tiny thoughts I thought were safe, private, and untouchable, and now they weren't. Not anymore, because she had seen them, held them in her hands, and I could only imagine the way she might twist them, the way she might look at them with judgment or amusement, the way she could weaponize my trust against me. And my phone buzzed on the desk, a message from her, casual. Hey, can't wait to see you later. And it was like a knife twisting because there was nothing casual about it anymore. Not to me, not after realizing that she had crossed the line. And I sat on my bed, staring at my diary, heart thundering, thinking about all the moments we'd shared, how we swore we'd have each other's backs no matter what. How she used to say, ride or die, Sky. And now I couldn't stop the tiny voice in my head from whispering, what if she's not that anymore? And the thought was unbearable, gut-wrenching, because our bond had been everything to me. My anchor in the storm of high school drama, and now it felt like the rope was fraying, knot by knot, thread by thread, under the weight of something I couldn't control, couldn't stop. And I reached for my diary with trembling hands, flipping it open just to see if anything was out of place. Any mark, any note that might tell me what she had found, but it was just as I had left it. Yet the misalignment of the pages, the subtle crease in the corner of a page I remembered being pristine, screamed that someone had been there, reading, rifling through the thoughts I had laid bare. And I remember feeling this mix of fury and heartbreak, a rage that I had never known could coexist with such vulnerability. And it hit me that this wasn't just about privacy anymore. This was about betrayal, about trust being shattered by the one person who I thought would never hurt me. And I thought about the subtle signs over the past few weeks, the tiny looks Madison gave me that didn't make sense at the time, the comments that seemed innocent but now felt loaded, like, oh Sky, you're always so secretive, or I wonder what you'd do if someone really knew you. And I had laughed them off, thinking she was teasing, joking, playing, because that's what she always did. But now they felt sinister, calculated, like breadcrumbs leading me to this moment, this unavoidable confrontation with reality. And I tried to calm myself, telling my heart to slow down, to breathe, because panicking wouldn't solve anything. Yet every part of me screamed that the foundation of my life, the one person I thought I could rely on, had cracked, and I couldn't undo it, couldn't unsee it. And as I sank onto my bed, hugging my knees, I felt tears prick at my eyes, a combination of grief for the friendship I thought I had and fear for what was coming next, because deep down I knew that Madison had found something she shouldn't have, something that could ruin everything, something that would turn our little world upside down. And I kept thinking about the weekend before, when we stayed up late binge watching movies and she had laughed at me for being dramatic about silly things, and now that laughter felt mocking, bitter, like it had been a prelude to this moment. And I wondered how she could smile at me now, knowing what she knew, planning what she was going to do with it, and the thought made my stomach twist into knots of panic and disbelief. And I tried to remember every word she had ever said, every inside joke, every secret we had shared, looking for signs I had missed, and I realized I couldn't trust my memory anymore, couldn't trust her anymore, and the room felt smaller, suffocating, every shadow suddenly loaded with threat. And I tried to plan my next move, trying to convince myself that maybe I could fix this, that maybe I could talk to her, that maybe she'd tell me she didn't mean to invade my privacy, but I knew it wasn't going to be that simple, because whoever she had become was not the friend I thought I knew. And as I sat there, staring at my slightly misplaced diary in the unlocked drawer, heart racing and chest tight with fear and anger, I knew that my life was about to change, that the world I had built carefully, quietly, lovingly, was about to tilt on its axis, and that the person I had trusted with my everything was now the one who could bring it all crashing down. And with that terrifying thought lingering in the air, I sank back against the wall, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "What have you done, Madison?" Knowing the answer was coming, and there was no going back. The morning after I realized Madison had been in my room, I walked into school feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me, every step heavy, every glance from my classmates suddenly weighted with suspicion. And it didn't take long for me to realize that the gossip machine had already started spinning, faster than I could keep up with. Whispers in the hallway that made my stomach churn, like a low hum of static that seemed to echo in every corner. People pretending not to look at me, but glancing with barely concealed curiosity. Some smirks, some pity, some outright judgment, and I could feel it in the subtle shift in the way my friends interacted with me. Hesitant texts that used to come instantly now came with long delays, awkward excuses, vague answers, and I felt myself shrinking under the weight of it all, like the world had decided overnight that I was somehow guilty of some invisible crime I didn't even understand yet. And it was all Madison, of course, sitting smugly at her locker, scrolling through her phone with that self-satisfied little smirk that made my blood boil because I knew she was controlling the narrative, planting stories and rumors about me, little half-truths and exaggerated lies, framing the secrets she found in my diary, twisting them into scandalous fodder for the school to devour. And the first time I heard my name mentioned in a whispered conversation, I felt my chest tighten, my throat dry, my hands tremble, because one of the rumors she had spun made it sound like I had betrayed someone else, spread some secret that wasn't even mine to share, and I could feel the way people were now looking at me. The hushed tones, the sideways glances, the giggles that stopped the second I approached and I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand she tell me why she was doing this, why she had turned so cold, so manipulative. But when I tried, she was sly, smooth, practiced, like a predator who knew exactly what she was doing, denying everything with this perfect, innocent expression, shrugging like it was all a misunderstanding. And the rage that had been simmering in me boiled over into helplessness because no matter how hard I tried to prove my innocence, she always had the upper hand, twisting the tiniest things, twisting our history together, the moments I had trusted her, the laughter we shared, turning them into weapons against me. And it wasn't just the rumors or Madison's manipulation that hurt, it was the way people started pulling away. My so-called friends who used to text me late at night to check in, who used to sit with me at lunch, now finding excuses to avoid me, their chairs empty, their eyes elsewhere, their conversations suddenly private when I approached, and teachers even seemed to notice, some giving me concerned looks that made me feel like a burden, others avoiding me altogether, like they didn't want to get involved in whatever scandal Madison had started, and every whisper, every smirk, every subtle glance felt like a knife in my back, twisting over and over, and I found myself walking the halls alone, head down, clutching my books to my chest, heart hammering in my ears, my mind racing with all the things I could do to stop this, to make her stop, to make people see me as I was. But the harder I tried, the more isolated I felt, the more my anxiety spiraled, because the rumor mill doesn't stop for anyone, and it certainly didn't stop for me. Not when Madison was orchestrating it like a conductor controlling every note of a symphony of lies. And I remember the first time someone I thought was my friend laughed outright at something they claimed I did, and I felt the world collapse around me. A combination of humiliation, disbelief, and rage so intense it made my vision blur, because this person had known me, trusted me, or at least I thought they did, and now I was a punchline, a character in a story I hadn't agreed to be part of. And I tried to confront Madison after school in the parking lot, heart racing, fist clenched, voice shaking, trying to ask her why she was doing this, trying to make her see the damage she was causing. But she laughed, that cruel, short laugh, and shook her head, pretending to be confused, pretending to be hurt by my accusations, saying things like, "Sky, what are you talking about? I would never do that." And every word was a dagger, every innocent-looking smile a lie. And I realized then that she was playing me, enjoying the power she held, and that realization cut deeper than any rumor, any whispered insult, any side glance, because it wasn't just the school against me, it was the one person I thought would always protect me, always have my back, who had turned her back first, and the feeling of betrayal hit like a tidal wave, pulling me under, making me feel small, invisible, and completely alone. And I couldn't stop thinking about all the things she had found in my room, in my private diary, the little confessions about feeling lonely, about struggling with anxiety, the things I had written about people I liked, things I had never intended anyone to see. And now the entire school acted like they had, like my life was an open book. And the humiliation, the shame, the anger, it all collided inside me until I felt like I was going to explode. Like I was trapped in this nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. And I spent days walking through the halls feeling like a ghost, like everyone was watching me, judging me, whispering, laughing, some sympathetic, most cruel, and every class I sat through felt like an eternity. Every cafeteria visit a trial, because Madison was always there, subtle, silent sometimes, just enough to make me paranoid, to make me question who I could trust, who I could talk to, and even the people who hadn't been involved yet treated me differently. Like I was tainted, like they could smell the scandal before it reached them. And I remember one moment in particular in English class when I accidentally dropped my pen and someone muttered my name under their breath. And I felt all eyes on me, and I wanted to crawl under the desk and disappear. And I thought about my parents, about how I wanted to call them, to tell them everything, but even they didn't fully understand high school politics, and I was too ashamed to explain that my own best friend had betrayed me in the cruelest, most calculated way. And I remember the nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, trying to figure out when Madison had changed, when the line had been crossed, trying to find any explanation that didn't make me feel completely powerless, and every text I sent to friends went unanswered. Every attempt at reaching out met with vague, dismissive replies, and I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared, like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I questioned everything about myself, every choice, every word, every secret I had ever shared, wondering if I had done something to deserve this, if I had been too careless, too trusting, too naive, and it was exhausting. This constant mental battle, the humiliation, the loneliness, the anxiety, all wrapped up with this raw, searing anger at Madison for betraying me in the most intimate way possible. And yet part of me couldn't hate her fully, because part of me still remembered the laughter, the secrets, the promises of ride or die loyalty, and that tension, that push and pull between rage and longing, betrayal and nostalgia made every day a struggle, every interaction a minefield, because I didn't know who I could trust anymore. And I was learning the cruelest lesson of all. The people who say they'll be there forever sometimes break first, and when they do, they can drag the whole world with them, turning your safe little universe into a battlefield where everyone takes sides. And for the first time, I realized just how fragile friendships could be, how quickly loyalty could twist into cruelty, how the whispers of gossip could become weapons, and how alone you could feel in a crowd full of people who had once called you friend. And that knowledge was heavier than anything I had ever carried, heavier than the heartbreak, heavier than the shame, heavier than the fear, because it wasn't just that Madison had betrayed me. It was that she had done it in a way that left me defenseless, humiliated, and painfully aware that I had no idea who I could trust anymore. And I spent that chapter of my life walking through school hallways like a shadow, heart pounding, eyes wary, hands shaking slightly, bracing for the next whisper, the next smirk, the next subtle reminder that I was the center of a storm I hadn't asked for, that my so-called ride or die friend had turned the entire school against me. And every day, every interaction, every glance and whisper drove home the harsh, unrelenting truth. Betrayal isn't just an act. It's a living, breathing thing that follows you, creeps into every corner of your life, and slowly, quietly, crushes you from the inside out. After days of feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of Madison's betrayal, something inside me snapped. The part of me that refused to be a victim, that refused to let someone else control my life. And in that moment, I made a decision. I was taking back control, no matter how long it took, no matter how much I had to endure. And the first step was figuring out exactly what she had found in my room, because until I knew the full extent of the ammunition she was wielding against me, I couldn't fight back. And so I started retracing my steps, thinking back to every time I had left my diary open, every note, every secret, every confession I'd ever written, and slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together what Madison must have seen. The entries where I wrote about crushing on someone she didn't know, the late night musings about anxiety and panic attacks that I thought were safe and private, and most dangerously, the pages where I described a personal hobby I had kept hidden because it was unconventional, something I loved but feared others would judge me for, and it hit me like a punch to the gut that this was what she had seized on, twisting it into some scandalous rumor, making it sound like I was secretive, deceptive, even manipulative. And that realization lit a fire in me that burned hotter than any anger I had felt before, because now I understood the weapon she was holding, and it was time to fight. Not just with words, but with strategy, intelligence, and the truth. And so I began gathering my allies carefully, knowing that most of the school had already been poisoned against me, but a few friends remained who had always trusted me, who had seen the real Skylar, and they became my lifeline, texting me discreetly, meeting me in corners of the library, whispering ideas, giving me support, helping me gather evidence, screenshots of messages, witnesses who could vouch for me, little pieces of the puzzle that would help me prove that Madison's narrative was false. And even at home, my older sister stepped in, reading over my diary entries with me, helping me sort through what could be used to counter the lies, coaching me on how to approach confrontation without losing control. And as I meticulously planned, every step carefully considered, every possibility accounted for, I began to feel that old sense of empowerment returning, the one I had lost when the rumors first began, the one that made me confident, clever, unafraid. And I realized that Madison had underestimated me, that she thought I would crumble quietly, that I would let her dictate the story of my life. And that was when I started plotting the confrontation, imagining it in my mind, rehearsing what I would say, the words I would use, the evidence I would reveal, and the way I would expose the cracks in her character without stooping to her level. And it wasn't easy, because deep down, part of me still hurt. Part of me still missed the friend I thought I had, the ride or die who laughed with me until our stomachs hurt, who promised loyalty in whispered conversations, who shared secrets like precious treasures, and the betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything else, but I pushed through the pain, letting it fuel me rather than paralyze me. And then came the day I decided to confront her directly, walking up to her in the school courtyard with my friends subtly flanking me, my heart hammering, my hands barely trembling, rehearsing my words one last time. And I asked her, voice steady, "Why are you doing this? Why are you spreading lies about me?" And she blinked, those perfectly practiced innocent eyes looking at me like she didn't understand, like I was a crazy one. And for a moment, I faltered because she was good at it, at pretending, at denying. But then I remembered every cruel smirk, every whispered comment, every rumor that had exploded in my life. And I pushed past the doubt, showing her the evidence I'd collected, the screenshots, the corroborating stories, even gently but firmly reading out passages from my diary that she had twisted into something ugly. And I watched as her carefully constructed mask began to crack, her smirk faltering, her eyes widening, the first real sign that she hadn't expected me to fight back, hadn't expected me to be clever enough to gather proof, and I could feel the tension shifting, the power dynamic starting to tilt, and I pressed on, pointing out inconsistencies in the stories she had told, how she had manipulated people she called friends, how she had weaponized trust, and I saw it then, the real Madison behind the facade, defensive, cornered, scrambling, and part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, that delicious taste of vindication, but I kept my focus on the bigger picture, on reclaiming my life and my reputation, and slowly, methodically, I laid out my plan to show the truth to the school, to let people see the real me, the Skylar who laughed, who cried, who struggled, but stayed true to herself. And as I spoke, I noticed allies in the crowd beginning to nod, subtle gestures of solidarity, and I felt a flicker of hope, a spark that told me this wasn't over, that the battle wasn't just about confronting Madison, but about taking back every piece of my life she had tried to corrupt. And that spark grew into a blaze of determination as I realized that the truth was on my side, that cleverness and courage could outmatch deceit if wielded wisely. And so I began plotting the next steps, thinking about how to strategically reveal Madison's lies without creating more drama than necessary, how to use social media, witnesses, subtle confrontations, and public displays of honesty to shift the narrative back in my favor. And even as anger simmered beneath the surface, I felt empowered, strong, capable of reclaiming control. And for the first time since the rumors started, I smiled, a small, private smile that no one could see, knowing that I wasn't powerless, that I could fight back, that Madison's reign over my life was not absolute, and that as long as I stayed smart, patient, and true to myself, I could dismantle the web of lies she had spun, restore trust with those who still believed in me, and most importantly, prove to myself that no betrayal, no manipulation, no rumor could define who I really was. And in that moment, standing there with evidence in hand, friends quietly backing me, and a heart full of resolve, I felt the first rush of real control, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in weeks. And though the confrontation with Madison had revealed cracks in her character, it had also revealed strength in me I hadn't fully recognized before. A cleverness, a resilience, and a determination that promised that the next chapter, the one where I reclaim my reputation and my life, was going to be mine to write. And I could almost feel the tide turning, the whispers beginning to shift, the subtle nods of support. And though the journey ahead would be anything but easy, I was ready, more ready than ever, to take back what was mine, to expose the truth, to show the world who I really was, and to finally take control of my story. The day I decided to take my life and my reputation back was the day everything changed. The day I stopped letting Madison write the story of me, and it started early in the morning when I walked into school with the calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. My backpack light, my diary securely locked in my bag, and a plan that I had spent countless hours rehearsing, because I wasn't going to confront her blindly. No, this was a chess game, and I had thought 5 moves ahead, gathering friends who still believed in me, allies who had silently supported me through the whispers and sneers, screenshots of texts Madison had sent, evidence of every manipulation, every lie, every cruel smirk that she had used to turn people against me. And as I walked through the crowded hallways, I felt a strange mixture of adrenaline and focus, my pulse steady even as I could feel eyes flicking to me, whispers trying to ignite like sparks, but this time I was ready. And when I finally spotted Madison by her locker, smirking as usual, scrolling through her phone like she owned the world, I felt no fear, only clarity, because I knew the truth, and I knew the power it carried, and I approached her slowly, deliberately, my closest friends flanking me just enough to back me up. And I said, voice steady and loud enough for people nearby to hear, "We need to talk." And she looked up, startled for the first time in weeks, that smirk faltering as she realized the game had shifted. And I pulled out my phone, holding it high, the evidence ready, the screenshots, the messages, the timeline lies she had spun. And I started speaking, calmly but firmly, pointing out each manipulation, each rumor she had started, each friend she had tried to turn against me, reading aloud pieces from my diary that she had twisted, and showing how she had taken innocent thoughts and turned them into weapons. And I could feel the crowd starting to gather, whispers growing into murmurs, eyes widening as the layers of deceit were revealed, and Madison's face changed from surprise to panic, her practiced calm unraveling as she realized the game was up, her denials faltering, her fingers twitching nervously over her phone as she tried to think of some way to spin this in her favor. But it was too late, because the proof was right there, in her own words, in her own actions. And I watched as people who had turned away from me began to lean in, seeing the truth, nodding subtly, some whispering apologies, some muttering things like "I didn't know" or "I should have asked," and it was intoxicating. This feeling of vindication, but it wasn't about revenge. Not really, it was about reclaiming what was mine, showing the world who I truly was. And I pressed on, confronting Madison directly, asking why she had done it, why she had turned her back on our friendship, and seeing the cracks in her carefully crafted mask. The hesitation, the guilt, the panic flashing across her eyes, and it was satisfying, yes, but also heartbreaking, because part of me still mourned the friend I thought I had. The one who laughed with me until our sides hurt. The one who promised loyalty in whispers and smiles. And now that person was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who had weaponized my trust and privacy, and yet, as I spoke, laying out the evidence, showing the proof to everyone around us, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted, as if the air itself had cleared and the crowd, once a sea of judgment and whispers, began to shift, eyes meeting mine with understanding, some tentative smiles, some nods, and I realized that my fight wasn't just about exposing Madison, it was about reclaiming my life, about letting people see me for who I truly was, messy, human, flawed, but honest and real. And as Madison's facade crumbled, I noticed friends approaching, the ones who had stayed quiet, hesitant, unsure, now offering support, arms linking with mine, whispers of solidarity, apologies, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the warmth of connection instead of the cold sting of isolation. And I watched Madison, flustered, defensive, trying to regain control, but every lie she attempted to spin now fell flat because the truth was visible, undeniable, and the school saw it, saw her manipulation, and I could feel the scales tipping in my favor, the momentum shifting, the power returning to me where it belonged. And I didn't gloat, I didn't taunt, I simply presented the facts, calmly, confidently, letting the truth speak louder than any words of anger could. And it worked, because by the end of that confrontation, Madison slumped, the smirk gone, the whispers around us no longer favoring her, and I felt an unexpected surge of pride, not just in winning back my reputation, but in the strength I had found within myself, the cleverness, the determination, the courage to face betrayal head on instead of crumbling under it. And as the day wore on, I began to rebuild, friend by friend, conversation by conversation, showing that I was still the Skylar they had always known, resilient, real, and while some friendships could never fully heal, while some people I had trusted remained distant, I learned that the scars from betrayal were permanent, yes, but they didn't define me. They strengthened me. They made me more cautious, more aware of who I allowed close. And by the time the final bell rang and the hallways cleared, I realized that I had won more than a battle against lies. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my dignity, and while part of me still felt the ache of lost trust, of the friendship that could never return to what it was, I also felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that I had stood up, had faced the betrayal, had confronted the lies, and had come out stronger on the other side, wiser, sharper, and more careful about who I trusted. And as I walked out of the school that afternoon, the sun casting long shadows down the streets, I felt a quiet, bittersweet triumph, knowing that the world hadn't broken me, that Madison's manipulation hadn't defined me, and that I could survive betrayal, social chaos, and heartbreak, and still emerge whole, stronger, and ready for whatever came next, carrying the lessons learned and the scars earned as reminders of the fragility of trust, the cost of secrets, and the power that comes from facing the truth and standing your ground no matter how high the stakes. The end. I helped my best friend get her dream job, then she tried to replace me and take credit for my work. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who looks back on friendships and wonders if I was too trusting, but here I am, sitting in my tiny apartment in San Francisco, laptop humming, coffee going cold, and realizing that some of the people you think are your ride or die can actually be the first ones to throw you under the bus. Or maybe in my case, try to drive the whole car while you're still holding the wheel. My name's Alex. I'm 26, and I work as a junior software developer at a mid-sized tech company downtown, which means I spend most of my weekdays buried in code, staring at screens that look the same whether it's 8 a.m. or 8 p.m., and surviving mostly on leftover takeout and caffeine. Life is fine, normal even, but it was always colored by Emily. Emily and I go way back, all the way to college days at UC Berkeley, where we met in that painfully awkward first-year intro coding class. I remember her sitting across from me, struggling to debug a simple Java program, and I leaned over, offered a suggestion, and somehow we clicked immediately. We were the kind of friends who would finish each other's coding projects. Well, more like I'd do a ton of work, she'd bring her ideas, and somehow it worked out so well that professors kept thinking it was a joint miracle rather than sheer hours of effort we poured in. We stayed up late, sometimes all night, fueled by ramen and energy drinks, brainstorming ideas for hackathons, building apps no one else understood, and dreaming about the big tech world like it was waiting for us to claim it. Emily was always ambitious, the type who could charm anyone into believing in her vision, and I guess I was a practical half, the one who made those visions actually functional. We balanced each other perfectly. Or so I thought. Fast forward to now, and she's on the brink of landing her dream job at one of those Silicon Valley startups that everyone talks about, but few actually get into. And of course, she needed my help. I spent weeks helping her refine her resume, making sure it actually highlighted her strengths without sounding like she was just riding on coattails, running mock interviews that had her answering questions confidently instead of panicking mid-sentence, and going over coding challenges together, line by line, pointing out nuances in algorithms, data structures, and best practices. Honestly, it was exhausting, juggling my own work projects and her dream job prep, but seeing her grow confident, seeing her finally believe she could actually get in was worth it. When she finally got the offer, I remember sitting in my living room with a mix of relief and pride, trying not to overreact when she called me, practically screaming, "I did it, Alex, I really did it." It was supposed to be a happy moment, a culmination of all those late nights and endless coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, but somewhere in the background, a tiny voice of caution started whispering. That voice grew louder when I noticed her starting to post on social media, talking about her amazing ideas at work with screenshots of projects we had literally built together back in college. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, she did the interviews and got the job. She deserves to be excited. But then the post got more detailed, more specific, and the way she phrased things made it sound like she had done everything independently. Every like, every comment, every congratulatory emoji felt like a little pinch. Not because I wanted credit publicly, but because the truth of our collaboration was being quietly erased. Still, I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. Friendships have quirks, people exaggerate things, right? Besides, Emily was my best friend, my go-to since freshman year, and there was no way she'd ever actually do anything to betray that. College memories kept looping in my mind, the late nights debugging a particularly messy API call, the countless caffeine-driven hackathon marathons, the time we pulled an all-nighter to finish a project due at 8 a.m., me falling asleep on the library floor while she kept coding with headphones, blasting music, refusing to rest until we made it perfect. Those were the days I thought defined us, days that made me certain we were invincible together. And yet, there was a subtle shift. I started noticing that whenever she talked about her career now, the words "we" started shrinking, replaced with "I." She would casually mention to colleagues how she came up with the architecture, or designed the feature from scratch, things that I had literally explained to her and helped implement over weeks. I tried to confront myself with rationalizations. She's excited, she's proud, she just wants to fit in, she doesn't mean anything by it. But then came the first real hint that this might not just be innocent exaggeration. An email forwarded by a mutual friend, a congratulatory note from someone at her new startup that said, "Great work on the project, Emily. Your leadership and ideas were incredible." And I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the screen, heart sinking, fingers numb, because I knew the code, I knew the architecture, I knew every little decision that went into that project, and she wasn't giving me any credit. Not a whisper, not even a nod. It wasn't even malicious yet. Not entirely. It was just that she was framing our joint work as entirely hers. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully she was curating this image of being the genius who did it all alone. I told myself again that maybe I was overthinking it, that friends sometimes act this way in professional settings, that she's still Emily, my best friend. And deep down, she knows the truth. But a nagging unease settled in my chest, one that only grew every time I scrolled through her LinkedIn posts or Instagram stories, seeing her smile in pictures of the office with her team, captions full of pride that subtly excluded any hint of collaboration. It hit me harder than I wanted to admit, because we had always promised each other that we'd rise together, that neither of us would leave the other behind. And now, for the first time since college, I felt like I was standing still while she sprinted ahead, not just professionally, but narratively, rewriting the story of what we had built together, and not even inviting me along. I remember sitting there late one night, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, the city lights glittering like a reminder that the world moves fast and doesn't wait for anyone, realizing that maybe this was where the line between friendship and ambition would start to blur. Up until now, I had been happy to be the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who helped, supported, and celebrated her victories, but seeing the erasure of my role in something that mattered deeply to both of us planted a seed of doubt, not just about Emily, but about how I would protect myself and my work in a world that didn't reward loyalty nearly as much as it rewarded visibility, credit, and charisma. And that's the hook. The thing that kept me awake at night long after Emily's excitement had worn off and the city quieted down. I had spent weeks building her up, helping her get everything she wanted, and now, in the soft glow of my apartment, I could feel the first tremors of a reckoning coming. A reckoning I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one I would have to face sooner or later, because the truth about our friendship, about who did what and who really deserved credit, was starting to surface, and I could feel it in my bones that nothing would ever be the same again. Things started to shift a few months after Emily settled into her dream job, and at first I didn't notice it, or maybe I refused to notice it because I wanted to believe our friendship was stronger than ambition. But there's a certain subtlety to betrayal, the way it creeps in quietly, like smoke through a cracked window, and by the time you realize the room is filled, it's almost suffocating. Emily was thriving, that much was obvious, but she was thriving in a way that slowly started to edge me out. At first, it was little things, innocent enough if you didn't know the context. A Slack message saying, I came up with this idea for the back-end architecture, which made my stomach twist because I had literally walked her through that same architecture step by step months ago, explaining why certain algorithms work better, why this function needed optimization, why that API call had to be asynchronous, or the casual, offhand comment in a Zoom meeting. I've been thinking about how to implement this feature efficiently, which, again, I had already built a prototype for and shared in a college project we'd worked on together. I felt a knot in my chest every time I saw her take the credit, and I wanted to say something, but I hesitated, because this wasn't just about friendship, it was her job, and if I started accusing her, it could look like I was jealous or petty, which was the last thing I wanted in my own career. And yet, she began leaning on me more, expecting me to help her remotely, to troubleshoot problems, to debug issues that I would know were ultimately hers to handle. And of course I helped, because old habits die hard, because loyalty and care were hardwired in me, and because, selfishly, I also believed in her potential, even when my gut told me she was starting to blur ethical lines. I was juggling my own workload at my company, projects that demanded hours of attention, meetings, deadlines, bug fixes, and code reviews. But every evening, I found myself looking at messages from her, reviewing snippets of code she had sent, giving suggestions on things that, if I'm honest, she could have figured out herself. I did it anyway, convinced that I was helping her grow and succeed. But slowly, the gratitude I expected from a friend was being replaced with something else. Subtle hints she dropped to colleagues, little comments to bosses that implied some of my ideas were hers, that some of the solutions were independently hers. It started small, just a vague, oh, I thought of optimizing the API this way during a team call, but it grew into something more organized, more deliberate. I felt it the day she tried to cut me out entirely from a project I had practically built from scratch. I had been working with her on this new internal tool, sharing the initial architecture, outlining the logic, writing test cases, basically doing all the groundwork, when she invited me to a status update meeting, and then, in the middle of it, subtly presented everything I had designed as her own independent work. She spoke confidently, smiling at the nods of approval from the team, and I froze, my mind spinning. I wanted to interrupt, to say, hey, that's mine, we built this together, but I knew if I did, it could backfire. She had phrased everything perfectly, and everyone seemed convinced this was her project, her idea, her solution. It was a punch to the gut, that feeling of shock, confusion, betrayal, all wrapped into one, and I sat there, pretending to type notes, while internally my thoughts were racing, wondering when the moment had shifted, when our partnership had turned into her solo ascent, with me just a ghost in the background. That night, I tried to rationalize it again, telling myself that maybe I was overreacting, that workplace dynamics were messy, that she was under pressure to prove herself and maybe didn't even realize how much credit she was taking. But it kept happening. Every success she posted about on LinkedIn, every congratulatory email she received from her company, every casual brag to mutual friends was tinged with my own contributions, and I was left watching as someone I had spent years helping, someone I had trusted more than anyone, rewrote the story to center herself. Then came the day that really broke the dam. I received a forwarded congratulatory email from a senior manager at her startup, praising Emily for her brilliant implementation of the tool that has already improved efficiency by 40%. And as I read the lines, I felt the room spin slightly, disbelief tightening my chest. That tool, the architecture, the core code, the testing suite was mine. Every line, every function, every sleepless night I had spent debugging, optimizing, and perfecting it had been distilled into her name, and I wasn't even mentioned. I sat back in my chair, hands trembling slightly, staring at the screen and trying to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the person who had just tried to erase me professionally. Anger and betrayal swirled inside me, but I knew I couldn't act impulsively. I had to be careful, strategic, because confronting her outright in the wrong way could ruin my own reputation. And in a competitive field like ours, perception often matters more than reality. I remember pacing my apartment that night, recalling all the times I had tutored her for interviews, all the late night coding sessions, all the guidance I'd provided, and wondering if she had ever truly appreciated it, or if it had been a calculated move all along. I felt torn because part of me still wanted to believe in the friendship, in the years of shared trust, but another part of me realized that blind loyalty might be my downfall if I didn't start protecting myself. I couldn't tell anyone yet, not colleagues, not supervisors, because the story would sound like jealousy or sour grapes, and Emily had the charisma and credibility to twist narratives in subtle ways. So I started documenting everything quietly. Every message, every line of code, every contribution I had made, keeping meticulous records of what was mine and what she had borrowed, copied, or repackaged as her own. And even as I did that, I still helped her, when she reached out, still responded to her request for assistance, still held onto the vestiges of trust because old habits die hard, and because despite everything, a part of me couldn't believe she was fully capable of betraying me. But the cracks kept widening. She started hinting to colleagues that she had built components of our previous projects independently, and whenever I offered help, she would take the solution I provided and present it as an insight she had just figured out herself. I started noticing colleagues nodding at her explanations, internalizing them as her work, and I felt my role shrinking, my presence fading. It was infuriating, and yet the most confusing part was the duality of her behavior. She could be warm, grateful, even joking and nostalgic with me in private, but in public, she crafted a different story, one in which I barely existed. I felt trapped between wanting to call her out and fearing the fallout, between wanting to preserve our friendship and needing to protect my career. Every time I thought I understood her, she shifted slightly. A new subtle maneuver, a new implication, a new omission. And I started realizing that this wasn't a one-off mistake, this wasn't harmless exaggeration, this was a deliberate pattern, a test of how far she could push, how much she could take for herself without me noticing or reacting. That realization hit harder than anything, because it meant that the person I had trusted most was willing to sideline me, even if it meant pretending our years of shared work never happened. By the end of that month, the sense of betrayal had crystallized. I wasn't just angry. I was alert, cautious, calculating. I was starting to see the contours of what I would have to do if I wanted to protect my work, my career, and eventually my dignity. And in the quiet of my apartment that night, staring at my screen, I realized something else. The story of our friendship was changing, and if I didn't act wisely, I would be erased entirely. A footnote in a narrative that she was carefully scripting around herself, one in which I had once believed we were equals, but which now seemed designed to make me invisible. That email, that single forwarded message, was the turning point. The first undeniable proof that Emily was no longer just ambitious. She was actively reshaping reality to her benefit, and the betrayal was no longer subtle. I knew I couldn't ignore it, and I knew I couldn't confront it recklessly, which meant that the next few weeks, months even, would be about observation, documentation, and strategic action. Because if I had learned one thing from years of coding, from late nights debugging and breaking apart complex systems, it was that the smallest oversight could collapse everything, and I intended to make sure that when the truth finally came out, it would be undeniable and it would matter. By the time I reached the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore, the mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief had solidified into something sharper. Determination. I realized that if I didn't act, Emily would continue erasing my contributions, framing my work as hers, and rewriting a story we had built together over years. So I started meticulously documenting everything. Every line of code I had written for projects we had collaborated on, every message in Slack where I had provided guidance, every version control commit I had made, I archived, timestamped, and categorized. It felt obsessive at first, but I knew that the smallest detail could be the key to proving my case. I created spreadsheets, screenshots, and organized folders labeled with project names and dates. I wasn't just doing it to protect my ego. I was doing it to safeguard my career because the stakes had become painfully real. Emily, meanwhile, continued presenting our joint work as her own. She would casually drop references in meetings to my idea or my implementation, and I had to bite my tongue every single time, nodding politely while internally planning my next move. I realized quickly that confrontation without proof would make me look petty or jealous, so I had to be smart, strategic, subtle, and undeniable. Over the next few weeks, I began planting small seeds. During team calls, I would reference specific features or designs I had built, phrasing them in ways that reminded colleagues without making it obvious that I was correcting her. I would casually share detailed documentation on Slack, letting the evidence speak for itself, while Emily, confident in her narrative, didn't notice. The thrill of watching the subtle cracks in her story begin to appear was oddly satisfying, and I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because justice was unfolding, sadness because it had to happen this way, at the expense of a friendship I had cherished for years. The breaking point came when she confronted me directly, her tone a mix of incredulity and indignation. She accused me of undermining her, of being disloyal, of refusing to support her success. She said things like, "I thought we were in this together, Alex. Friends don't do this to each other. You're making this about yourself instead of celebrating what we've accomplished." I listened quietly, letting her rant, letting her reveal how much of her defense was built on the idea that loyalty should silence me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I continued to refine my documentation, collecting email chains, version histories, and screenshots that left no room for misinterpretation. I created a timeline showing exactly who did what, when, and how contributions had been made. Then came the day I decided to turn the tables. During a series of internal meetings with higher-ups about the new product launch, I subtly referenced my past contributions in ways that looked casual but were backed up by the documentation I had painstakingly prepared. I sent private emails with attachments of version control histories to my manager, highlighting areas where my code and designs had been foundational to the product. I made it look as if I were simply keeping everyone informed, but in reality, I was creating a paper trail that would be impossible to dispute. The effect was immediate and intoxicating. Colleagues who had once accepted Emily's narrative began asking clarifying questions, noticing inconsistencies in her claims, and quietly acknowledging my input. Emily tried to spin explanations, but every time she did, I had proof, timestamps, and records to counter her. The tension was palpable, unspoken yet present in every interaction. Meetings became a battleground of subtle strategies, her confidence waning as cracks in her carefully constructed persona became visible. Emails that had once been supportive or congratulatory now carried undertones of doubt, questions about timelines, and inquiries that she couldn't answer without referencing work that clearly wasn't solely hers. And then came the big one. The company-wide meeting to present the new product, the culmination of months of development, the stage where Emily had been planning to shine in the spotlight, claiming credit for work I had done. I prepared carefully, rehearsing how to reveal the truth without looking like I was attacking her. I would highlight my contributions in a way that appeared professional, factual, and integral to the product's success while letting her claims naturally unravel in the eyes of everyone present. When the day arrived, I walked into the conference room with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. As the presentation progressed, I waited for the perfect moment, watching Emily beam as she explained features, proud of the narrative she had built. Then, when the timing was right, I interjected. Not aggressively, not accusatorily, but confidently, showing version control histories, annotated emails, and documented contributions that clearly demonstrated my involvement. The room fell silent as everyone digested the evidence, subtle glances exchanged, eyes widening as the truth became undeniable. Emily's face shifted from confident to panicked, her attempts to reclaim the narrative faltering in real time, and I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication, knowing that the truth had finally surfaced. In the aftermath, colleagues approached me quietly, congratulating me, acknowledging my hard work, and expressing surprise at the discrepancies they hadn't noticed before. Emily tried to recover, but the credibility she had built over weeks of misrepresentation had eroded, leaving her struggling to defend herself against objective evidence. That day, I realized that loyalty without self-preservation is dangerous, that trust can be manipulated, and that sometimes exposing the truth is the only way to reclaim your life and your work. It was bittersweet. Our friendship, once a source of joy and collaboration, was fractured beyond repair. But my career, my dignity, and my contributions were finally recognized. I walked out of that meeting with a sense of closure I hadn't expected, aware that the reckoning I had orchestrated was both professional and personal. Emily's ambition had collided with my integrity, and while I mourned the loss of the friendship we once had, I also celebrated the realization that protecting yourself doesn't make you disloyal, it makes you accountable. And as I sat back later that evening, reviewing the day's events, I knew the stage was set for the final chapter, the ultimate resolution of a betrayal that had begun with trust, been tested by ambition, and culminated in a reckoning that left no illusions about loyalty, honesty, or the price of standing up for yourself. The day of the big product presentation arrived like a storm I had been waiting for, a moment that carried months of tension, preparation, and quiet strategizing, and I could feel the weight of it the second I stepped into the sleek conference room, the air buzzing with anticipation and the low hum of projectors warming up. Emily was already there, radiant with confidence, chatting with team members, laughing in a way that suggested she owned not just the project but the entire room. And I had to remind myself to breathe, to keep my composure, because this wasn't about ego. It was about truth. And after months of feeling invisible, of watching her subtly rewrite history, this was my moment to reclaim the narrative without turning it into a public spectacle that could make me look petty. The room filled quickly with colleagues, managers, and even a few senior executives from other departments, all eager to see the culmination of months of work. And as the presentation began, Emily launched into her well-rehearsed spiel, highlighting features, sharing results, and occasionally sprinkling in anecdotes about her team and her leadership, which, if you knew the truth, was mostly a solo journey I had quietly supported. I listened carefully, taking mental notes, waiting for the precise moment when I could subtly, professionally, and irreversibly make my contributions clear, letting the facts speak louder than any accusation. When she paused to introduce a key feature, one I had designed, coded, and tested, I smoothly interjected. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, just enough to clarify, referencing the version control logs, annotated emails, and documentation I had built over weeks, framing it as context for the team rather than a personal vindication. And as I spoke, I could see heads turning, colleagues exchanging glances, eyebrows raising, and slowly, the truth began to settle in, almost organically. Emily's confident smile faltered just a fraction, and I realized that while she had tried to craft a flawless narrative, She hadn't accounted for the tangible, verifiable proof I now presented in a neutral, professional tone, and watching her struggle to maintain control over the narrative was both satisfying and surreal. I continued weaving in subtle references to my contributions, highlighting collaborative milestones, version histories, and coding decisions, making sure it looked like I was simply providing context and clarification, not publicly shaming her. And by the time the presentation reached the most technical part, the room was charged with a mixture of awe, realization, and quiet shock, as colleagues finally connected the dots between the work they had assumed Emily had done solo and the tangible evidence pointing to my central role. Emily's attempts to recover were frantic but ineffective. She stumbled over explanations, misremembered details, and for the first time, I saw the confidence that had once intimidated me begin to crumble. Emails, screenshots, and commit histories had done their work. The truth was undeniable, and in the subtle, silent judgments of our peers, her misrepresentation began to unravel. After the presentation, colleagues approached me privately, offering congratulations, expressing surprise, and quietly admitting that they had assumed Emily had led key parts of the project alone. But my documentation had clarified everything, and I felt a rush of vindication, tempered by the bittersweet realization that the friendship that had once defined so much of my life was effectively over. Emily tried to speak to me afterwards, her tone a mix of panic, defensiveness, and regret. But there was nothing left to salvage. Her vision of shared loyalty had collided with my insistence on fairness and integrity, and I knew in that moment that while she had shaped part of the story, she could no longer rewrite the truth, not without looking like a liar in front of everyone whose opinions mattered. Walking out of that room, the city lights of San Francisco, stretching through the glass walls, I felt a combination of relief, pride, and melancholy. I had stood up for myself, reclaimed the recognition I deserved, and protected my professional integrity. But in doing so, I had severed the ties of a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. The experience left me reflecting on the nature of trust, the subtle ways ambition can distort relationships, and the importance of establishing boundaries early. How loyalty is invaluable, but not when it comes at the expense of self-respect or truth. And as the evening settled in, my manager called me into a private meeting, congratulating me, not just for my technical brilliance, but for handling a delicate situation with professionalism, and hinted at a new opportunity, a lead role on a high-profile project that could define the next stage of my career. I left the office that night with a sense of closure and a renewed confidence, the pain of betrayal tempered by personal growth, a clear understanding of the balance between ambition and integrity, and the knowledge that standing up for oneself is not only necessary, but empowering. The friendship with Emily had ended and that chapter was closed, but what remained was a lesson I would carry forever. Trust cautiously, support generously, but never allow loyalty to blind you to your own worth, because sometimes the biggest victories come not just from what you build, but from claiming the recognition you rightfully earned while navigating the complex, often messy intersection of ambition, friendship, and personal integrity. And as I stared out at the city lights that night, I couldn't help but feel that, despite the turbulence, the best was yet to come. The end. We promised to stay friends forever until I found out I was the one sending anonymous hate messages about me. I guess I should start with the basics. My name's Ethan Walker. I'm 18, and for as long as I can remember, Mia Reynolds has been my world. My partner in crime, my other half of that cliche best friends forever thing that nobody really lives up to. Except maybe us, or at least I thought we did. We met in kindergarten, and for some reason, the universe decided we were destined to annoy, support, and sometimes almost kill each other with laughter for the next 12 years. I remember Mia, with her messy brown hair always falling in her eyes, the way she laughed so loud it made the cafeteria seem quieter, just so we could hear it better, and her uncanny ability to know exactly what I was thinking, even before I knew it myself. We shared homework, secrets, heartbreaks, crushes, and even dreams that were too big for our tiny bedrooms, like the time we swore we'd take a road trip across the country the summer after graduation. 2 backpacks, 2 cameras, and 0 responsibilities except each other. High school has been this chaotic, dizzying mess of tests, social media drama, and parties where people pretend they're having fun while secretly being terrified of not fitting in. But somehow, amidst all that chaos, I always had Mia, and that was enough. She had this way of making me feel like I wasn't just a background character in my own life, that I actually mattered. And honestly, I took that for granted, never thinking that anyone could ever threaten that bubble of safety we'd built around ourselves. And then, the first message came. I was scrolling through Instagram late one night, half dozing on my bed, when a notification popped up from an anonymous account. "Nice try, loser. No one cares about you or your little fake smile." I laughed at first, like, really laughed, because who the hell cares about some random troll? But the laugh was hollow, a nervous little bark, because deep down, I felt that twinge of discomfort that you try to ignore. The one that tells you this isn't normal, even if you can't quite explain why. I shrugged it off, rolled over, and went to sleep, chalking it up to the kind of petty stupidity that social media thrives on. But then, it didn't stop. Every morning, every few hours, more messages, each one sharper, more personal. Comments about my nose, my hair, my laugh, and eventually about things I thought only Mia knew. Little insecurities I had shared with her on long walks home, thinking they were safe inside the walls of our friendship. That's when the unease turned into confusion, and the confusion edged into panic because suddenly the trolling didn't feel random anymore. I started noticing patterns. How the messages came right after Mia had been on my account to help me set up posts, how she sometimes looked at me with this strange, unreadable expression that didn't match the carefree Mia I knew, but I brushed it off every time, telling myself I was being paranoid, that it had to be coincidence, that I couldn't possibly suspect her, because Mia couldn't ever do something like this to me, right? Still, I tried to maintain our normal routine because high school doesn't wait for your personal drama. We went to classes, shoved each other into lockers just for laughs, argued about stupid things like who would sit shotgun on the trip to the mall, and spent late nights talking about the future, about the music we loved, the movies we wanted to see, and how we'd somehow survive whatever came next. And yet, behind every laugh, every shared meme, a shadow of worry started to grow in the back of my mind. It was subtle at first. She'd disappear from my side for a few minutes during lunch, checking her phone more than usual, sending a text, and immediately looking away when I tried to peek. Small things that didn't add up at the time, but now feel like breadcrumbs, leading to something I wasn't ready to see. I even found myself scrolling through the messages on my phone more than I should have, analyzing the wording, the times, trying to pinpoint the sender without letting Mia see, convincing myself that if I just figured it out, I could go back to everything being normal. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if our friendship had cracks I never noticed, wondering if the person I trusted more than anyone in the world could actually harbor some kind of resentment or jealousy I'd been blind to all these years. And still, every morning, I'd see her smile when she came to pick me up for school. That familiar, messy-haired, brown-eyed grin that made me think maybe I was just losing it, that maybe the hate messages were nothing, just random trolls, and that our friendship was intact, safe, unbreakable. But somewhere in the pit of my stomach, that tiny seed of doubt refused to die. The way she laughed at my jokes felt just slightly off, like she knew something I didn't. Like she was in on a secret game I hadn't been invited to, and when I caught her staring at her phone, quickly locking it when I looked over, my heart did that stupid jump. That same jump it always does when someone close makes you feel like you're about to be betrayed. I kept asking myself if I was imagining things, if I was overthinking because I cared too much, because Mia had always been there, my constant in a world of variables, and I wouldn't let paranoia ruin that. So I carried on, smiling, laughing, planning another weekend adventure with her, joking about senior year drama and college applications, all the while feeling that quiet nagging sense that something had shifted, a subtle change in Mia I didn't want to acknowledge because the thought that my best friend might be the source of all this pain was unbearable. And even as I write this now, recounting it months later, I can still feel the tension, the way my stomach sank whenever she walked into the room, the way I forced myself to dismiss tiny inconsistencies, the way I clung to our history so tightly that even the faintest sign of betrayal didn't seem real. It was, at the time, only a whisper in the back of my mind, a shadow I tried to ignore because I loved her, like a brother loves a sister, like a friend loves a friend, and nothing, not 100 messages, not 1,000 doubts, could convince me that someone I'd promised to stay friends with forever could possibly hurt me. But looking back, I realized that whispers are often the first warning sign of storms, and no amount of denial can keep a storm from coming. I wish I could say that things got better after the first few messages, that life went back to the easy rhythm of high school with Mia by my side, but that wasn't the case. If anything, everything spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And the terrifying part was, I had no idea who had the power to hurt me like this. The messages kept coming, and they got worse. Far worse than a random troll could ever dream of. They started to leak into real life. Little things that made me feel exposed, like someone had peeled back my skin and was writing on it for the entire world to see. Everyone thinks you're pathetic, one message read. Even your little best friend is probably laughing behind your back. At first, I tried to laugh it off in the cafeteria, cracking a joke about how dramatic the internet was, but the laughter felt hollow and forced. And when I glanced at Mia, hoping she'd shrug and reassure me, like she always did, I caught a flash of something in her eyes that didn't sit right. A smirk, almost like she knew more than she should, and my chest sank like I'd swallowed a rock. I started confiding in a few friends, the ones I trusted enough to believe me when I said I didn't know who was behind the messages. But it didn't help. Everyone denied it, stared at me like I was overreacting, and some even suggested I must have done something to provoke it, like my reputation had magically imploded overnight. It was humiliating, and it made me feel isolated in a way I'd never felt before, because the one person I thought I could count on, Mia, suddenly felt like a stranger hiding behind her own familiar face. I tried to investigate online, tracing accounts, checking IP addresses, anything I could do to find out who had the audacity to send such personal, vicious messages, but the deeper I dug, the murkier it got. Every lead turned into a dead end, every clue felt like it was leading me in circles, and the anxiety started gnawing at me in every moment that wasn't consumed by classes or homework or trying to pretend everything was fine. And then there was Mia. She started acting differently in ways that were small enough for me to rationalize, but big enough for my gut to scream. She would avoid my texts for hours, sometimes a full day, only to reply with short, offhand messages that seemed almost designed to irritate me. Her favorite little subtle digs, the kind that made me question whether I'd imagined the cruelty. At lunch, she would laugh at my jokes, but that laugh had this sharp edge, like she was laughing at the absurdity of me rather than with me. She'd make comments that seemed innocuous at first, like teasing me about things I was insecure about, only to twist them slightly so that I felt self-conscious in front of others. And I caught myself replaying conversations late at night, trying to figure out if I had misread her tone or if something was really off. My paranoia grew, but I refused to confront her directly because the thought of being wrong and accusing my best friend of something this horrible terrified me more than the messages themselves. I started keeping mental notes of the patterns, the times the messages would appear, what Mia had been doing right before, who else was around. Every detail became a clue, every casual glance from her a potential warning sign. The rumors started spreading, too. Some of the messages were leaked anonymously to classmates, twisted little lies about me that made people snicker when I walked by, whisper when I entered a room. I felt trapped, like the world was watching me collapse slowly under this invisible assault, and yet no one could see it except me and maybe Mia, the one person I couldn't read anymore. I began to notice how adept she had become at hiding the tiniest slips of emotion, how she could feign concern with the perfect tone, how she could joke with me in a way that felt like camaraderie while sending my mind spinning with doubt. There were days I caught her staring at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, her thumb hovering over the screen like she was deciding something privately, and every time I tried to casually peek at it, she'd whip it around like it was nothing, but I swear the tension in her shoulders, the slight twitch in her smirk, it all screamed that she knew more than she was letting on. My stress reached this point where it started to bleed into everything else. Schoolwork, friendships, even my family, who thought I was just tired or moody, but they had no idea the psychological warfare being waged from an anonymous source that seemed almost omnipresent. I spent nights staring at my ceiling, replaying memories, looking for moments I might have misread, trying to figure out when Mia could have started harboring these hidden feelings, if that was even what it was. And the more I searched, the more I realized that some of the messages contained details only someone close would know. Things I'd only ever told her, inside jokes, personal thoughts I'd never broadcast, and that realization tightened the pit in my stomach until it felt like I couldn't breathe. Every time she came over, I found myself watching her too closely, analyzing every movement, every laugh, every casual touch, trying to catch a crack in the facade that could explain why she seemed so different, why my heart kept twisting in knots for no reason I could verbalize. And yet, I still wanted to believe in her, still wanted to cling to the idea that Mia, my lifelong best friend, was incapable of such cruelty. So I pushed down the fear, smiled at her jokes, shared memes, made plans like nothing was wrong, all while my mind ran constant simulations of what was really happening, who could be behind the messages, and if the truth was something I was too scared to face. At school, the whispers grew louder, the glances more pointed, and every notification on my phone made my chest race. But Mia's presence remained this strange paradox, comforting and threatening at the same time. Some days I thought maybe it was just stress, maybe the paranoia was mine alone, but then a comment, a message, a timing I couldn't ignore would hit me like a gut punch, and I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I began obsessively checking every device, every account, every shared password, any way to trace the source, convincing myself that if I just kept going, if I just stayed vigilant, I could catch whoever was behind this and make it stop. But the deeper I went, the more I started noticing how perfectly the pieces fit around Mia's access. Her knowledge, her presence in the house when the messages arrived. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it couldn't be her, that she loved me like I loved her, that she could never betray me like that. And yet, every fiber of my body screamed that something was wrong, that the trust I had taken for granted was now under siege. And the worst part was that I didn't know if I was imagining it or if the person who knew me best was slowly turning into my worst enemy. And in the back of my mind, a thought I tried to suppress, one I didn't want to admit even to myself, kept creeping in. Maybe the person I'd promised to stay friends with forever was the one pulling the strings all along, laughing at my pain while pretending to be my ally. And that realization, unspoken but ever present, filled me with a fear so deep it made me question every laugh, every shared secret, every promise we'd ever made to each other. By the time I realized the patterns, I was already exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically, because the messages weren't just random anymore. They seemed almost orchestrated, like someone was timing them perfectly, waiting for moments when I was most vulnerable, most distracted, most dependent on Mia being there to pick me up from the storm. And the terrifying thing was, the more I analyzed, the clearer it became that Mia's presence often coincided with the arrival of these messages, like some twisted game only she knew the rules to. I tried joking about it at first, that fake bravado you put on when you're scared out of your mind. "Hey, did you hack my account while I was in class again?" I asked once, laughing awkwardly, expecting her to roll her eyes and reassure me like she always did, but instead she tensed. Her smile faltered for just a second, and she muttered something about me being paranoid, her tone dripping with an edge I couldn't place. That tiny crack in her facade set off alarms in my head louder than any of the messages ever could, but I still wouldn't let myself believe she could betray me. I started keeping notes secretly, every timestamp, every notification, every detail that seemed out of place, hoping that if I could just catch something concrete, I could prove it before confronting her, because I wasn't ready to destroy the only friendship that had ever made sense in my life. I set up logs on my devices, started using IP trackers, documented the messages as meticulously as I could, and even tested the waters by leaving my phone unattended while Mia was around, pretending I'd forgotten it on the couch, hoping some instinct would betray her, some slip of the hand, some inadvertent glance, and it almost felt like the universe was finally giving me a hint because I noticed her sneaking peeks, hovering just a little too long when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A quick movement to lock my screen the instant I entered the room. And that sick, sinking feeling in my chest that had become constant, intensified to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. The psychological strain was insane. I started replaying every memory, every interaction, looking for signs I'd missed, things that could explain her behavior, anything that would make sense of the chaos, and I hated myself for even suspecting her, because she had been my constant, my rock, the one person who never left my side. And yet, the evidence was piling up in my mind like a dam ready to break. Every time I tried to act normal around her, laugh at her jokes, share stories, or plan something fun, I found myself watching her out of the corner of my eye, noticing how she subtly nudged my laptop closer to her when I wasn't looking, or how she would casually comment on things that I'd only ever mentioned in confidence, and I began to feel like I was trapped in a psychological maze with no exit. I confronted her casually a few more times, throwing half jokes about privacy and online trolls, but each time her reaction was off, too defensive, too quick to mock me in a way that felt almost rehearsed, and it ate away at my trust piece by piece. The fear of being wrong battled the fear of being right, and I spent nights awake, obsessively comparing timestamps of messages with times she had been near my devices, trying to rationalize the unthinkable, clinging to the hope that I was imagining things, that I was just overanalyzing because of stress or paranoia. And yet, the patterns were undeniable. Every time a particularly vicious message arrived, Mia had been in the room with access to my phone or laptop, sometimes helping me with something she insisted I couldn't do alone, sometimes offering to grab my charger or my headphones, always lingering just a little longer than necessary. And the thought that she could be the source of all this pain churned in my stomach like acid, a feeling I could not swallow down no matter how hard I tried. It got to a point where I started setting small traps, leaving minor decoys in my devices, making subtle changes and seeing if anyone reacted, and watching her reactions like a hawk, noting every micro expression, every fleeting blink, every pause, because I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. I had to see the proof with my own eyes. And then, finally, after weeks of obsessive tracking, of sleepless nights and anxious heartbeats every time she entered my room, I caught it. A subtle slip, a hesitation, a message sent before I could even blink, traced to the only device in the room that could have done it. A device she had touched, accessed, and pretended to ignore. And in that moment, my entire world shattered. The realization hit me harder than any words, harder than the most vicious anonymous messages. Mia, my lifelong best friend, the person I had trusted more than anyone, was the one behind it all. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and I felt like I was staring down a cliff I could not climb back from. Because all the laughter, all the shared secrets, all the plans for the future, everything we had promised to each other suddenly felt tainted, a cruel joke played at my expense. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, to break down and beg for an explanation that I doubted I would ever get. But instead, I froze, staring at the evidence in my hands, at the timestamp messages, the IP addresses, the subtle cues I had collected meticulously over weeks, and every emotion collided at once. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, disbelief, and a sorrow so deep it felt like my ribs were hollowed out. And as I looked at her, pretending like nothing had changed, smiling that smile I'd loved my whole life, I realized that my innocence, my blind trust had been weaponized against me, that the person who knew me better than anyone had used that knowledge to hurt me in ways that cut deeper than any random stranger ever could. And the thought that someone who had promised forever could harbor such cruelty left me gasping for air, trembling on the edge of a revelation I knew would change everything. The emotional storm was overwhelming. I had to confront her, but I needed control, proof, a way to survive the moment without destroying myself completely. and I spent hours rehearsing how I would do it, how I would keep my voice steady, how I would present the evidence without breaking apart, knowing that once I crossed that line, there would be no turning back. And in that tense, suffocating silence of my bedroom, with the glow of my laptop illuminating the proof that my best friend had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, I realized that the cracks in our perfect friendship weren't just cracks. They were chasms, yawning and impossible to ignore. And the person who had once been my world had become the architect of my pain. And for the first time in my life, I understood that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired, no matter how much I wished it could be. I remember the moment I decided I couldn't wait any longer, couldn't hide behind my own fear or hope that this was some terrible misunderstanding. Because by that point, the evidence was undeniable, overwhelming, and suffocating. And every second I spent pretending everything was fine felt like I was digging my own grave. So I called Mia over to my house under the guise of needing to talk about college applications, trying to keep my voice steady, my hands from trembling, and my mind from spinning out of control while I rehearsed a confrontation I knew would destroy everything. When she walked in with that familiar grin, the one I had loved and trusted for years, I felt a pang in my chest so sharp it nearly took my breath away. And for a moment, I couldn't even speak, just stared at her, heart hammering, laptop open on the couch, documents, screenshots, IP logs, everything neatly laid out like a dam ready to burst. And I realized that the person sitting in front of me, the one I had shared my entire life with, the one who had promised forever, was also the architect of every moment of anxiety, fear, and humiliation I had suffered over the past weeks. And when I finally found my voice, it was quieter than I expected. Almost trembling. "Mia, it's you, isn't it?" Her reaction was instantaneous, but not what I had imagined. She froze for a split second, eyes darting like a cornered animal, then tilted her head, that same mischievous smirk I hated and loved all at once creeping across her face, and she laughed, this soft, almost mocking laugh that cut deeper than any words ever could. "Oh, you actually found out," she said, her tone almost casual, like she was discussing the weather instead of confessing betrayal, and my stomach dropped because I needed to scream, to hit something, to beg for an explanation that I doubted I would ever get. But instead, I sat there, frozen, forcing my hands to stay on the edge of the couch, forcing my voice to remain steady as I said, "Why, Mia? After everything, why me?" And she leaned back, crossing her arms, eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and defiance. "Why not? You always had everything. Attention, friends, teachers loving you. And me? I was always second, Ethan. Always the one behind the camera, the one smiling for you, supporting you while you got praised, while everyone clapped for you. It was exhausting, boring, predictable. I just wanted to see what it felt like to matter for once. And I felt my heart twist inside my chest, the betrayal so deep it physically hurt, because every memory I had of her, every sleepover, every laugh, every tear we had shared, suddenly felt tainted, like someone had taken a paintbrush to a masterpiece and smeared it with darkness. And I thought of all those times I had defended her in front of teachers, friends, strangers, thinking we were a team, only to realize that the person I had trusted most had been quietly dismantling my life in the background while wearing the mask of loyalty. Flashbacks came flooding in. The subtle jabs about my crushes she had teased me about more cruelly than I had noticed at the time. The times she accidentally shared embarrassing moments to get attention or a laugh at my expense. The way she always knew what buttons to push, and I had mistaken it for closeness, for friendship, for intimacy, when really it was a slow erosion of trust, a careful study of how to manipulate me from the inside out. I felt numb and furious at the same time, a storm of grief and anger colliding, but I also felt clarity. I knew who she was now. And I could never pretend the same way again, could never give the same unguarded love and trust I had once given freely. And so I spoke, voice cracking, heart hammering. I can't do this anymore, Mia. I can't look at you the same way, can't trust you the same way. You've broken something in me that can't be fixed." She shrugged, smirk fading just slightly, maybe realizing that her little game had finally cost her. But still, she didn't look sorry, didn't look regretful. She looked satisfied, or maybe just indifferent. And I felt my chest tighten at the coldness, at the cruelty of someone who had meant so much to me being capable of such deliberate harm. The next days were surreal. I avoided her at school, walked the opposite way in hallways, pretended she didn't exist in places we used to share, and the world felt different, sharper, colder, like someone had pulled the rug from under me and I was floating in a vacuum where every interaction carried the shadow of what had happened. Friends noticed, asked questions. I dodged, lied, half smiled, because I didn't want everyone to know my best friend had betrayed me in the most personal, humiliating way possible. And the messages themselves stopped coming eventually, probably because she knew I had discovered the truth, probably because the thrill of control was gone, and I was left to sift through the emotional wreckage she had left behind. Rebuilding was slow. Every time I laughed, I remembered her smile. Every time I trusted someone new, I felt a pang of suspicion. Every compliment felt like a trap. Every friendship a potential betrayal, but slowly. Through late night walks, journaling, talking to family, and a few trusted friends, I started putting the pieces of myself back together, learning to set boundaries, to protect myself, to recognize red flags before they could hurt me again. And as I reflected on the months of chaos, I realized something bitter yet liberating. Some friendships aren't meant to last forever. No matter how many promises are made, no matter how many shared memories are stored in the recesses of your heart, because people can change. Or maybe they were never what you thought they were in the first place, and learning to accept that is part of growing up. Part of learning that trust is precious, that loyalty is earned, and that self-worth isn't dependent on someone else's approval or manipulation. And while I still think of Mia sometimes, while the memories sting like salt in an open wound, I also feel stronger, sharper, awake to the world in a way I never was before, carrying with me the lesson that betrayal can happen anywhere, even from the person who once promised to stand by you forever, and that the only thing you can control is how you rebuild yourself after it's done, how you reclaim your life, your peace, and your heart, even if the ghost of a friendship that once felt like forever lingers quietly in the background. The end.